when the tsunami hit Japan, I was the first foreigner to come back to Japan, if you remember. I was the first one. Because it happened that I was in France on the executive committee. I was the first foreigner to come back in Japan when everybody was leaving Japan. And I was the first one to dare going to Iwaki plant, which was near Fukushima. Because in Fukushima, if you remember, you had the nuclear leaks. And nobody dared to go to Iwaki because of the nuclear leaks. I had to go by myself and call the suppliers and call the employees to say, we're going to rebuild the plant together. I have my kids in Japan, educated in Japan. I lived in Japan. I refused to abandon Nissan only because I cared about the country and they cared about the company. So I'm asking one question. I'm not cold toward Japan. I love Japan. Why Japan is paying me with evil for the good I think I've done to the country? I don't understand that. I profoundly don't understand that. Because I know Japanese people are not like this. The second thing is they're greedy. They say, I'm greedy. I'm greedy. In 2009, Steve Ratner, who was Obama car czar, General Motors was down, Chrysler was down, he came to me and said, I talked to the president, we want you to become the CEO of General Motors. He has written this in his book, so I'm not telling you stories. You can look at the book. And he was offering me a pay which was double my pay. I said, you know what? I understand your offer is very attractive, but a captain of a ship doesn't leave the ship when the ship is in difficulty. This is not a greedy guy talking. A greedy guy would say, sorry guys, this is business. I'm going to go for my own interest. And frankly, I made a mistake. I recognize it today. I should have offered. I should have accepted the offer. But I had my beliefs, and I followed my beliefs. Then, so this is about greedy. The third thing is about dictator. Well, they discovered I'm a dictator in 2018. For 2007, for 17 years, I'm a CEO of the company. I had 20 books. You have so many professors coming. I have so many cases in Harvard, Stanford, INSEAD, HEC, Waseda, KU, all of them coming, all the professors analyzing this. Nobody discovered I was a dictator. All these people who have made the analysis, have made all the cases, nobody had a doubt that I was a dictator. This whole thing, which was very elegantly fabricated, imposed on the Japanese public. But you know what? The public did not react in function of what they said. Because I told you, I didn't have a bodyguard. I walked in Japan all the time, by myself or one of my kids. We have never been bothered by anybody. We have always been received very well in all the restaurants and the places that we have visited. But they tarnished my reputation in many other countries where the fact that you have power or you're supposed to have money, you're already guilty. Well, it was not the same treatment, as you know. We're going to stop here and make a small break. I can continue, but maybe.
We're just going to do a break for those who want audio translations. We're going to provide some audio translation. So please ask for it, because Mr. Gunn will be answering questions asked in Arabic, questions in English, and questions in French, Thank you very much.
And question in Portuguese, Sure.
All right, that is a dramatic press conference from Carlos Ghosn, his first public speaking engagement since fleeing Japan. As he said, I didn't escape justice, I fled injustice, as he speaks in Beirut. To some applause, guys, obviously highlighting not just what he sees as a failure of the criminal justice system in Japan, but ridiculously emphatic on the integration issues between Nissan and Renault.
Well, it does feel like there is this guilt until proven innocent there. I mean, and if the trial goes on for so long, it's kind of like you're you're under house arrest forever.
Yeah, in a sense, justifying his decision to flee and successfully do so, finding himself in Lebanon. The first time we've obviously heard from the former CEO since he was charged, incarcerated for some time, then held under house arrest. But it was interesting. He obviously defending himself in all different ways with a detailed presentation that included documents with his signature and many others in terms of talking about what Japan alleged were these diverted funds that went to his accounts, trying to say, of course, that was not the case. And then, as Carl said, going into sort of questions about synergies and M&A and whether Chrysler and Fiat should have ever gotten together and why Fiat didn't get together with Renault.
How about the job offer he got from Steve Radner?
Yeah.
I mean, GM. I mean, there was a kind of it was a little bit rambling, but he basically told the story of Auto's ex-Musk.
Michelle Crusoe Cabrera is there in Beirut. We're going to talk to her in a moment. Obviously, Phil LeBeau has been helping us follow the story ever since he did flee. He didn't really want to talk about the logistics of how he got out of the country.
I know, and that's what we wanted. Prurient interest.
That's where a lot of the drama has been centered. Phil LeBeau, you had a good curtain raiser going into this press conference, but I'm not sure anybody could have predicted exactly what we heard just now.
I thought that Carlos Ghosn was pretty much what we expected. Impassioned, pretty forceful, very forceful in many points. Showing the documents was effective. I think David's right that when he started talking about whether or not the Nissan, Renault, Mitsubishi alliance should have also brought in Fiat Chrysler, whether or not he should have taken over as CEO of General Motors. I think that because it started going off into some of those tangent areas, he might have lost the effectiveness of what he was saying. But some of his quotes, I mean, when he said, I had a choice. I could die in Japan or I could prove my innocence somewhere else. I chose to go somewhere else. I mean, that says it right there. It was a very straightforward comment from him about why he made the decision that he made. Now the question becomes, how effective will this be, plus interviews that he may be doing in the weeks and months to come in rehabilitating his image, which, let's be honest, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what they're looking to do here.
All right, Phil, thank you for that. You see at the bottom of your screen, the president, meantime, is going to address the nation on Iran at 11 a.m. Eastern time. As you know by now, it's been a dramatic overnight session. Dow futures overnight were down as much as 400 points. Gold hit 1611. 10-year yield got down to 1.7. All of those have recovered. As the U.S. reports no casualties in those two Iranian attacks on military bases in Iraq where American troops are stationed. Oil we're watching. We're going to get inventories later on today. We should mention the Boeing crash in Tehran, a 737-800, waiting for some more clarity on that. And then ADP, 202 in December. It's the best number since April.
Did we have a 9 p.m. bear market? I mean, think about this. Is the possibility that gold peaked last night? Oil's down. I mean, is it possible that that was a phony war, so to speak? Or is this the beginning of a new era where we're trading 24/7 and you just have to be around the clock watching? Because that was a tremendous move that occurred. But if you were to actually have just been watching Jeopardy, you might have just not known that we had a bear market.
Yeah, futures were down
500
dramatically for a short period of time, and then as the word came that there were no casualties, and then a hope seemed to come that perhaps it would result in a de-escalation rather than an escalation. Right. Although that still remains unclear.
Well, but I mean, they did. I mean, not that we should trust necessarily anybody, but they did immediately come out and say, "You've seen our response." We had to make a response based on what you'd seen our response, and I think the president's press conference is going to tell all.
It's going to be hugely influential, the direction he wants to take this, right?
Yeah.
So many reports out today about does he want to take an off-ramp? Right. Or is how much risk premium is permanently now, at least in Brent, right?
And he's such a wild card. I always find it amazing. Should anyone really do anything between 9:30 and when we see that press conference? I mean, there's some huge bets being made. Lennar, big housing stock, up big. Walgreens, very disappointing, down big. Constellation, really good beer numbers, up big. I mean, are these going to change at 11 when the president speaks?
No, and Macy's actually having better comp store sales than had been anticipated.
Right.
That stock showing a bit of life this morning, so there is some corporate news. But
that's Nabif.
When it comes to Iran,
it was Nabif.
Not as bad as feared. Right. It's not good, but it's not as bad as feared.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's all right.
No, and we'll get to some of the downgrades today, which there are a few.
Oh, my. Valuation downgrades all over the place.
Let's get to Michelle Crusoe-Cabrera in the meantime and put this Ghosn press conference into some perspective. Good morning, Michelle. Talk about what you saw firsthand and your reflections on what Ghosn said.
What's not working? Well, first of all, he didn't give us any details about this international caper that he managed to mastermind, and I think the audience was disappointed about that. As expected, it was a lot about trying to vindicate himself and really try this case in public opinion, in the court of public opinion, rather than doing it in Japan, where he repeated over and over again, based on the way Japanese law works, that he doesn't think he would have gotten a fair trial. If I can tell you what's going on right now, they are handing out translation mechanisms for all the reporters here, because some of the questions are going to be in Arabic, some are going to be in French, some are going to be in Japanese, and they are providing translation for everyone here so that they can understand the questions, which will be helpful. And they've been yelling at everyone to sit down, but obviously there's so many people here and it's so crowded, it's been difficult for them to get it done. But Carlos Ghosn is actually still speaking right now and asking everybody to sit down so that he can answer as many questions as possible. So we're still here, and we'll bring you more after this all finishes.
Michelle, any clarity on to what degree he will be free to travel in the future? Is he stuck in Lebanon forever?
That's a very good question. I expect that will be asked, but we didn't get any kind of clarity from him on what his expectations are about his future and his ability to travel. But I'm sure that's something that will come up during the Q&A, Carl.
Which we will take a listen to in a moment when that begins. And we'll be also, guys, looking for some response out of Nissan, executives that he basically accused of trying to derail his right to justice.
Well, it does feel that, I don't want to call it a criminal enterprise, but what the heck was going on there? It's kind of a free fire zone. It seems like anybody wanted to do anything. It's a big worldwide company that obviously was managed in a very sloppy way. Where's the equivalent of the SEC?
Well, he claims that everything that they allege was false. That he was being framed.
But
right, as Nissan was trying to purge themselves of the influence of Renault.
Well, I guess so. I mean, he also presented himself as a patriot, rebuild, first to come back. And you're listening to this man, and he's diverting a lot. Talked about his wife, talked about the actual.
To watch. Certainly, it's something we've rarely seen. An executive of his stature arrested in the first place, held for as long as he was, solitary for some time, unable to be in contact with his family, and then, of course, the amazingly daring escape. Let's listen in.
You want me to the podium? No, I try to be as much as possible. Oh, it's okay. For you, I will do it. It's okay. That's fine. Okay.
رح نحترم بس الرغبة إنه ما نوقف بسبب الكاميرايات.
Yeah, please go ahead.
السؤال الأول يتعلق بظروف الهروب. حددت أنه ما بدك تحكي بالتفاصيل، ولكن هناك العديد من الروايات التي تحدث فيها الإعلام. هل رح تكشف تفاصيل هالهروب؟ وهل صحيح أنك وقعت عقد مع نتفليكس واتفقت مع أحد المنتجين لتصويره بطريقة فيلم؟ والسؤال الثاني عن المرحلة المقبلة بلبنان، هل هناك حديث عن إمكانية توليك منصب رسمي أو مساعدة لبنان اقتصاديا وسياسيا؟
Okay.
مسيو غسان، ثاني سؤال مارلان خليفة، هل بتعتقد هل وضعت استراتيجية دفاعية لإلك، وهل بتعتقد إنه دفاعك عن نفسك من لبنان بيقوي موقفك أو بيضعفه؟
Okay.
All right, so this is what happens when your object of attention speaks three languages. You don't know in what language he's going to respond. We are going to try to get him when he does speak in English, but he's obviously addressing constituencies all around the world.
Yes, the world's spellbound. And this is a very important figure. This is one of the most important industrialists in the world. And it does seem like, he's on the lam.
And I just, this morning as I was watching, I thought if I were an executive watching this, can I ever imagine myself climbing into an acoustic music equipment suitcase, right? Paying $30 million. That's a high tolerance for risk.
Maybe it's auto executives. We got a guy dancing a jig in Shanghai. We got a guy crawling into a box. Auto used to be very staid.
Perhaps not any longer. Yeah.
No, it's different. the state people are out in CES.
Listen, he feels like he was running for his life.
Yeah.
What does it say, Jim, that we are talking about this after the events of last night? It's really going from the extreme macro down to which essentially is a micro story.
Look, the strange is Iran attacked the U.S. airbase. We have a bellicose president, and the futures are acting like it was a positive. I mean, it is the desperation to get into this market is extraordinary. It's frantic. They don't even wait until the opening bell to get in. They try to take advantage of every little bit to be able to get in. And remember, January under Trump in the NASDAQ has been extraordinary, all 3 years. It's kind of, people said, I got to use this break to go buy NASDAQ. I mean, it's a little odd. Don't you think?
And is all of that contingent on getting some good corporate guidance and commentary starting next Tuesday?
I actually believe so. I had Dinesh Paliwal last night, he ran Harman from CES, and the tailwinds from what's going on out there are extraordinary. The ADP number's great. I mean, it's almost like, okay, listen, unless oil goes higher and oil's down, just put that in the geopolitical camp. It doesn't influence us. And those of us who are older are saying, how is this possible? Younger people are saying, listen, didn't impact oil. Why should we? The algos are fine. You know, Macy's is good. American Express gets approval after years, 14 years, gets approval to do its business in China. Perhaps the most important thing that the Chinese have done in terms of making it so that we can have independence, and it's ignored. I think that's huge. I think that came out of a little filing.
You've been talking about that for a long time.
I couldn't believe it. They did it. I mean, this is what the United States has been waiting for, is some sense that we're allowed to have businesses that are not not partnered with bogus institutions.
Chinese partners,
the party, just the People's Bank of China, they just released it in a social media post. President
President's not going to address until 11 a.m.
Right.
So we're going to have to wait until then. By the way, we haven't discussed
this China application. I'm telling you, this is huge.
China application for American Express support. We haven't even mentioned this tragic plane crash as well, involving a Boeing 737-800. Very much unclear exactly what occurred. There were some early statements from the Iranians, because it took off from Tehran, was headed for Ukraine, carrying 176 people, all of whom perished.
Plane was 3 years old, we believe, delivered in 2016. It's a 737 NG, it's not a MAX, but Cowen does cut today Boeing to market perform on the MAX, which they think is going to hold back free cash flow to $15 a share this year.
That's Kai von Rumer. He's the axe in the stocks, most important. And he's still saying that there's good cash flow, but not as much as thought. I actually thought it was pretty positive for all the downgrade. And I think there's also a sense, and this is from Greg Smith, who's running the company now, not Calhoun yet.
Only for a handful more days.
No, but I mean, there's a new feeling of transparency. I think people feel comfortable with that. There's a lot of people are getting a little more sanguine about it when you got two settlements from airlines that didn't cost Boeing a ton of money. I don't know. I find it kind of unbelievable that on a day when you have a crash and you have a downgrade, that Boeing is barely down. That's the most important analyst saying, I no longer have conviction. And it doesn't matter.
Well, their target is 371. That's, again, out of Cowen.
Right,
on a day where BAML also cuts Southwest to neutral.
I know. He did admit that he got too bullish.
Yeah, said that's it was too early when they... back in, I think, November.
Yeah, and a lot of people felt that this thing would be behind them. The notion that the pilots have to do simulation, that is a repudiation of what Dennis Muhlenberg had been saying. They're repudiating a lot at Boeing of Dennis Muhlenberg, and it's happening pretty quickly.
And how about this TikTok in the Journal on how the board eventually turned on Muhlenberg, really without any warning to him, at least.
Yeah, he was somewhat unaware of their change, but
the rest of us were aware, so it's kind of interesting that he wasn't.
It is kind of funny, isn't it, that he was unaware of something that perhaps we'd been given some signals towards for at least a couple of weeks.
320 million other people were kind of waiting for it.
Well, a lot of people were waiting for it, but he seemed to be somewhat secure in his position at that point.
Meanwhile, I saw you wave to Bill Ackman.
I said hi to Bill Ackman.
Noted hedge fund manager.
Bill Ackman ringing the bell after a very strong year for his his flagship fund. But he's Howard Hughes, remember, which I
he loves Howard Hughes.
Company
What a
had
wild
enough
day.
sale. He's the chairman and a significant owner of the stock of Howard Hughes as well. So they're here doing the honors.
A lot of stuff happening.
I did give a wave to Mr. Ackman.
Well, I just saw that. It's kind of interesting. On a day when the world has collapsed and then got rebuilt, you gave a high sign to Bill Ackman.
Yes, I greeted him.
How about
I
me?
do so many of the other people here that I've known from my long career covering business. Yes.
Look, we have an incredible. We have cybersecurity. Sorry.
Go and speaking in English. Let's take a quick listen.
Nick Kostoff from the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
I'm curious as to what your plan is now, because it seems to me it's going to be difficult to find a legal forum in which to clear your name. So how do you feel about the prospect of living out, the rest of your life as an international fugitive? Is that the price to pay for getting out of Japan? Is it worth it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, first, I am used to what you call mission impossible. I've been into many mission impossible. When I went in Japan in 1999, everybody told me, it's impossible. You're not going to be able to make it. Who are you? You don't speak Japanese. You're coming from France. You're coming from Renault. Nobody knows that. And you know the story. I don't consider that now I'm in a situation where I cannot do anything. I can do a lot. And I'm going to clear my name. And I'm going to find the ways to make sure that the truth is going to come back. So today, yes, on the short term, I'm here. And by the way, I'm proud to be here because I'm surrounded by friends in Lebanon. I'm surrounded by people who respect me and who are proud of me, which really I needed after the ordeal I've been through. But I'm not going to just, say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to do anything else. So you can expect me in the next weeks to take some initiative to tell you how I'm going to clear my name, what kind of forum I'm going to be used to make sure that all the evidence are going to come to the table and that everything I've done be restored and everything which happened be put not into a propaganda system where I appeal as the cold, greedy dictator, but for what I have been is somebody who has been a very important actor in the car industry with everything I've done. My friend,
Mr. Ross.
No, please. Okay, CNN, yes, please.
BBC. Carlos Ghosn, request CNN. Following on from my colleague's question, it might seem to some that you've substituted a very small cell in Japan for a much larger one here in Lebanon, where you can't go anywhere, you can't leave the country, you and your wife are both at risk. Would you go to France? Would you even risk getting on a plane to go to France, even though the minister there has said you would not be extradited?
Yeah, well, as you know, there is a red notice that the Japanese government has sent through Interpol. My lawyers say we can fight the red notice, and particularly we can eliminate the red notice if we can explain our case, particularly if it's considered as a political case. They are more competent than me to tell you what's going to happen. But obviously, first, I don't consider myself as a prisoner in Lebanon. I'm very happy to be here, I can tell you. And I prefer this prison to the one where I was before, you can imagine. And particularly here, I'm with my friends, I'm with my family. My kids can come visit me. I can use the phone. I can use internet. I don't have followers, or the only followers I have, by the way, I didn't talk to you about the followers. I will probably. The only followers I have are people who want to talk to me or who want something much nicer than I've been. So, frankly, I don't feel at all unhappy in Lebanon. I'm ready to stay a long time in Lebanon, but please do not consider that I'm just accept this as it is. I'm going to fight because I have to clear my name, and this is something which is extremely important to me. I can't accept the fact that fabricating a story and lying about something at such a scale can win or can prevail. I can't accept it, particularly that this is my story.
Mr. Ghosn from the BBC.
Okay, no, just 1 second. Yes, lady near Richard.
What's the point of having this?
Yeah, can you give him?
Well,
can you give him a microphone, please?
Is this the microphone?
Yes, I'm coming back to you.
This is no. Looking
Please,
for the mic.
go ahead.
The question is, hi, Michelle Caruso Cabrera, CNBC. You said that you want Nissan to have autonomy, but autonomy needs to be earned.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's contradictory to me. Did you ever propose a merger, a full-on merger between Nissan and Renault?
I didn't. I proposed a holding company where you have one share for the lines. That means there is no more Renault share, Nissan share. There is one share which is an aligned share, but you have a Nissan operation based in Japan, you have a Renault operation based in France, you keep the headquarters, but you have only one board. So you will have different headquarters, different brand, different executive committee, one board, one share. That's what I was proposing. So it was not the full merger, because in a full merger you have one headquarters, you have one board, you have one executive committee, which was not the case. So I was trying as much as possible to overcome the resistance coming from the Japanese to wanting to be very autonomous, and at the same time from the other side the willingness of the French to go for a full merger. So I thought that the holding company, the way I was presenting, was a very good balance between the wish of a full merger from one side and the desire for autonomy. But as you know, at the end of the day, one side said, why do we need all of this? Okay, let's get rid of him. And that's what happened, because today there is nothing. There is no holding, there's not even an alliance. We went backward. We didn't go forward, we went backward. BBC.
Mr. Goen, John Simpson from the BBC. Two questions, if I may. You say, and it's understandable, you don't want to cause a fuss between Lebanon and Japan, but it's clear that you say there's been a conspiracy. How high up in the Japanese system does that conspiracy go? Does it go up perhaps to the very top, would you believe? Secondly, would you be prepared to stand trial in Lebanon on the charges that that have been leveled against you?
Okay, so on the first question, I mean, if you were not saying that you were from the BBC, from the two questions you asked, I would have guessed. You know, so for the first question, you said I don't personally think that the top level was involved. If this is your question, I don't think. If you're talking about Abe-san, I don't think Abe-san was involved. Well, you know, again, I need to respect my own word to avoid any friction between the two countries, and I think this is my duty to make sure that you know, we don't create more tension than what may happen. So we're going to stop it. Now the second question was about? Yeah. No, I would be ready to stand trial anywhere where I think I can have a fair trial. Anywhere. But the only reason for which, if somebody could guarantee to me, which was not the case of my lawyers, when I asked my lawyers many times, and they will tell you that in Japan, will I have a fair trial? They were very embarrassed. They told me, we're going to do everything for you to have a fair trial. And they kept saying this to me, which worried me a lot, because if my lawyer cannot even tell me you're going to have a fair trial, I think Hironaka-san in his statement, or Takashi-san in his statement, they said, you know, even though he doesn't have a fair trial, we think he will be acquitted. Because of the strength of the argument they have in hands. When you are in a position, you're not in your country, you don't speak the language. People tell you you're 99.4% conviction rate. Estimate is all of this because you have the first trial, the appeal, and then eventually Supreme Court. Then the second trial, the appeal, Supreme Court. 5 years. 5 years estimate, no guarantee. 5 years of trial. After this, a 99.4% of conviction rate. Oh my God, that means I was seeing myself staying practically all my life in Japan. By the way, deprived from my wife, because there was absolutely no sign they were going to release a ban from my wife. When I went, I was not an expert of the Japanese system. When I went on bail, my lawyers told me, usually after 2 months, 3 months, if you respect all the conditions of the bail, which I did, they start to soften a little bit. You can start to use your phone, you can use your, email at home, maybe you can see your wife. That's what they told me. 9 months later, nothing was softened. Not one thing was softened. I was asking for the phone, for nothing at all. The judge kept saying, we're going to keep the same thing. And then what they told me is, you may not see your wife before the second trial starts. So my prospect was, I couldn't see Carol, I couldn't talk to Carol for another 1.5 years. For what? Tampering evidence? But I have plenty of people visiting me. I could tamper evidence with anybody. With anybody. And by the way, I left Japan, even though I had followers behind me, camera in the house, no telephone, etc. So if I was intending to do something, I would have done it. Anyway, so this was persecution. This was persecution, it was obvious. And because I felt this persecution and no hope, and you have this bombarding of the villain, unfortunately supported outside, I decided to take the risk. Because I wanted justice. And now, I can tell you, the first forum where I can express myself in front of the justice, which is not biased, I'll go for it.
Monsieur Ghosn, Christophe Vekibizine.
Mr. Ghosn, Reuters.
I'm sorry. Guys, we are losing a lot of time. We're losing a lot of time. Okay. Now, question. Japan. No. See, Japan. Why you choose Lebanon, not land? Do you want your child to be in Lebanon because it's more easier for you? I'm coming from Arabic. Ma'am, I don't know if it's easier or more difficult or anything else. Why you choose Lebanon? Well, I choose Lebanon because I'm Lebanese. I could have I'm Brazilian also. I could have chosen Brazil. I can choose France. But I choose Lebanon for consideration which are more logistical than anything else. Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. Let's go here. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Samia Nakhouch from Reuters. Can I go ahead? Samia Nakhouch from Reuters. I just want to ask you, the Japanese prosecutors are still saying and pushing for you to be extradited. Do you have assurances from the Lebanese president and government that you won't be extradited and you're safe in Lebanon?
No, I have no assurance of anybody. But I think there are precedent and there are laws, and I trust that the laws existing in Lebanon will be implemented. I have no reason to doubt that. So here I am confident that the existing practices and the laws will be respected in Lebanon, and I think this is what I heard from all the officials in Lebanon. So now Japan, question to Japan? Japanese question, please go ahead.
You have the mic. You have the mic.
Oh, is it TV Tokyo? TV Tokyo. Who is TV Tokyo? TV Tokyo. TV Tokyo. Yeah. TV Tokyo.
テレビ東京の阿部です。Speaking English.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Well, if not, you're not going to have an answer.
Okay. You were a respected CEO in Japan, but you broke Japanese law to be here. Isn't it wrong? Please let the Japanese people know your thought.
My what?
Broke.
My thought.
Yeah, your thought. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, to Japanese people.
Well, obviously, again, let's go back to your question. As you said, I was, and I still think I am, for at least part of the population, a respected businessman in Japan. And I remember I had many meetings with the press, and the press even, which is not very favorable to me, who told me nobody contests the fact that you have revived Nissan, nobody contests the fact you have done good things in Japan because all the other CEOs were following some of the practices that you introduced in 1999, etc. Nobody contests that, okay? But you need to defend these charges, okay? You have charges against you, you need to defend them, which is exactly what I want to do. But how can I defend myself if I am denied justice? If I'm denied the tool to defend myself, how can I defend myself? Yeah, I mean, obviously, breaking the law in Japan because I got out of Japan is a problem. But don't you think it's a problem that the prosecutor broke 10 laws in Japan following and nobody cares? Nobody cares. I mean, they broke the law. I mean, you know very well that there is a law in Japan saying the prosecutor cannot leak. You know that, okay? You know that. But you know they leak. Everybody tells you they leak. All the journalists come tell me, we heard this from the prosecutor. Okay, they're breaking the law. But nobody cares. So why me breaking the law is a problem when the prosecutor breaking 10 laws is not a problem and nobody cares? So at a certain point in time, when you are in a situation where the only guy you have to respect the law and everybody else doesn't respect the law and nobody cares, you say it's a rigged system. It's a rigged system. And I don't think, and frankly, I don't think Japan deserves that. I don't think Japanese people are like that. As I told you, I like Japan. I like Japanese people. I spent 17 years. I don't regret it. I don't regret it. I'm telling you. What I regret is specific nomination I've done inside the company, because at the end of the day, I was damn wrong on the people. I regret that. But the Japanese people have been good to me. And my intention is not to hurt Japan or to hurt the Japanese people. But why am I being paid with the evil? Why? What did I do?
Remarkable press conference from Carlos Ghosn continues, saying he's ready to stay in Lebanon for a long time, does not consider himself a prisoner, but has no assurance that he won't be extradited eventually. Says he will see in the coming weeks more evidence of as he attempts to clear his name. Answers Michelle's question, says he proposed a holding company for the alliance, not necessarily a merger, but whatever you think of Carlos Ghosn, he is not hiding behind counsel. He's not issuing prepackaged press releases. He's taking every question.
And he didn't implicate the top of Japan. I thought he might implicate Abe. No, because it does seem like a vast conspiracy against this man.
That's
but
what
it did
he
not
seemed to be
way.
alleging, but he wouldn't go there.
No.
Interesting morning, of course, watching Mr. Ghosn, this incredible story. At the same time, of course, we're keeping an eye on the markets, given what was going on yesterday around 6 o'clock with missiles flying from Iran at a couple of air bases based in Iraq. Thankfully, it appears no casualties. Futures look down enormously, only to reverse, and now we have the S&P up 0.21%, guys. Speaking of auto stocks, by the way, Tesla's gone parabolic in a handful of trading days we've had so far this year, up 12.5%.
27% of the float is still short. I mean, it's dangerous if they earn $5-6 a share next year. GM, by the way, said that their numbers are going to be down 15% in China. Do you know that China's numbers for autos are going to be up? I question whether China, even as they just granted American Express that right of way, whether China doesn't want. I think China doesn't want GM to be as powerful as it is. 3 million cars. I don't think they want them to sell that many cars next year.
Yeah, they've got a few of their own manufacturers.
That's right, they do.
We do want to take one last peek into what Ghosn is telling these reporters. Take a listen.
It's already full. If I had all the Japanese media here, it would not have been possible. But I'm not running from them. And I'm counting on you to carry the message.
Monsieur Ghosn, Christophe Jacubizine de BFM Business. Vous avez dit qu'il y avait deux raisons pour que toute cette affaire commence. Ouais. La première, c'était les performances moins bonnes de Nissan. La deuxième, c'est le droit de vote double instauré par l'État français en 2015. Est-ce que vous tenez responsable, le ministre de l'économie de l'époque, de l'avoir institué? Je rappelle qu'il s'appelait à l'époque Emmanuel Macron.
Oui, non, je suis navré, mais vous avez mal compris ce que je voulais dire. Le premier élément que j'ai dit, bien sûr, c'est le déclin de la performance.
We do want to pay close attention to what Ghosn is saying, but obviously he is pivoting between French and English. But the commentary continues, and this is not the last we've heard from him, that's for sure, as he vows to continue to present evidence over the next several weeks. So we'll be watching the story. I mean, it's a mix between corporate management and international intrigue at this point.
Yeah, in the meantime, the things that I'm looking at, what are the leaders in this market? Lennar, because they had great numbers. D.R. Horton, largest home builder. Pulte Home, going to report tomorrow, be careful. Macy's, L Brands, Capri,
28 Macy's and one Bloomingdale's.
Big short squeeze.
Closing more stores.
Yeah, big short squeeze in Macy's. They have a giant February meeting. Pay close attention to Nordstrom. I think that's going to be the biggest upside surprise. What is this about? Employment. Employment is so strong in this country that we tend to want to. We can listen to Ghosn. We can focus on the air bases that were attacked, but you can keep coming back to employment to try to figure out what's going to happen with our market, and I think it's incredible.
Macy's numbers are pretty impressive.
Yes.
Core comps for November, December, up 0.6. Recall back in Q3, they were down 3.5, so they're already pacing ahead of what analysts are expecting for fiscal Q4.
Yeah, and Jeff's saying to me, they're getting out of, look, they're getting back into the A and B malls. Those who are in the A and B malls are doing quite well versus comparisons. Not as bad as feared is the way I would look at that. Can I just mention one other thing I thought was really important? The American Cancer Society said the one-year decline...
Unbelievable. These numbers are insane.
Thank you, because I just think this is huge.
The death rate from prostate cancer, breast cancer, all kinds of
melanoma, actually, where they've really taken, thankfully, taken such strides as a result of Opdivo, Keytruda, any number of other therapies for melanoma. I think an over 6% decrease.
So I'm going out next week to the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. It's technology. It's these great American companies, Bristol Myers, it's Merck, but also this targeted immunotherapy, and yes, also decline in smoking
and lung cancer, which has been a longer-term trend as smoking has slowed dramatically. Of course, you brought up vaping many times.
Right. Now you see Walgreens de-emphasizing vaping. It did hurt the front of the store. They're getting hurt cigarettes, getting hurt vaping.
Let's talk a bit about Walgreens for a second, because the stock is down almost 6%. It's been in the news a bit. Remember this effort that may or may not have been undertaken to some extent, at least to investigate the idea of could they possibly take this company private. As its market cap continues to decline, perhaps that becomes less of a long shot, although I think it still is. But why is the stock down today, Jim?
Well, the numbers both in the front of the store and the back of the store were alarming. I mean, alarming versus what expectations were. I'm kind of shocked that they could be this bad. I mean, they're poorly run, but to say that they're poorly run makes, CVS is down. CVS is going to, the comparisons are going to crush them. Most retail's doing right well. The pharmacy is bad. Front of the store doing hurt by Amazon. And no, I keep thinking about them for their fabulous, at one point, alliance with Theranos.
Right. Actually, there was.
Carrier's book?
Yeah,
Walgreens. I mean, what is the due diligence that they're doing? How is that company being? This is a gigantic company. It's a Dow stock. They cannot shoot straight.
Stefano Pessina, the 77 or so year old CEO, multi-billionaire, owns a great deal of the stock. I mean, it's not as though he's not invested in the success of this thing.
But get some professionals in. Really. 95 cents versus what we're looking for, $1.18. Retail pharmacy comps, 1.6%. We're looking for 5.3%. I mean, this is the most colossal miss in retail. It's rather amazing, particularly on a day when Macy's is better. And like I said again, I think Nordstrom is the winner. That's the one you're going to see really nice numbers. These guys are just, I think Amazon's killing that store.
Interesting. We mentioned some of the downgrades today. We mentioned BAML cutting Southwest, but Cowen cuts Yum.
Right.
BAML cuts Cisco. BAML cuts FireEye after an upgrade out of SunTrust yesterday.
They didn't like Palo Alto, too, and I think Nikesh Arora is going to disagree with that CEO. Some of these downgrades are really, like the Pizza Hut part of Yum is doing quite poorly. And it's amazing because the rest of Yum's doing well. Not sure what they can do.
Yeah, their point is that Taco Bell will not command the narrative the way the underperforming Pizza Hut will.
Isn't that something? Pizza's been, is historically a growth market, but it's also pizza's been hurt by delivery and the huge amount of venture capital money that's going into.
Oh, I loved your tweet this morning about Uber Eats. They got to sell this, what you call it, a ridiculous business?
Yes, I mean, 50% of the parts of Uber Eats are bad, and it's causing the whole thing to kind of be let's just say, ill-advised. If they sold Uber Eats to Grubhub, okay, Grubhub would go up 25-30%. And Uber Eats would go up big, and Dara's got a
not Uber Eats. Uber would. I mean
Uber
because
Dara's has to wake up.
They would actually have an ownership position.
Yeah, and the worst part of their business is Uber Eats.
Well, it's the money they're spending in certain markets that are extremely competitive.
Yes.
We brought this up many times, but they've made the point as well in their conference.
Well, what's a sacred cow? There's no sacred cows.
Well, come on. I mean, listen, you can't argue that investing the way they need to now to make sure that they're number one in certain markets will result in profits and growth eventually.
David, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem. I like it. David just came up with it. Oh my, David, this is my lead for Mad Money. It's not about ecosystem. It's about ecosystem, including Carlos Ghosn. He's developed an incredible ecosystem. Did you do it on purpose? That may be the smartest thing you've ever said in the 8 years we've worked together.
No kidding.
It's an ecosystem.
Count every one of those days as a blessing.
Right.
But with Apple, it's an ecosystem, I assume, right?
Yes.
Why, did you see the numbers on the App Store? Up 16 year on year between November, December, I think?
I got I have the Pro, the AirPod Pro. I just bought from my wife, the Mac Air, $1,600. I mean, she's just like, this is the greatest machine ever.
Is it
I mean,
good?
she says this is the holy grail. I mean, that store where I had brought a lot of trouble in the stores, I communicated that to Apple, meaning that, you know, when you have stores that are too crowded and they ask you to wait here and wait there, that's a high quality problem. People go to those stores and they buy. They do not browse. They buy.
Let's get to Phil LeBeau here, get some reflections on what Carlos Ghosn has told us. He's speaking in French at the moment, but Phil talked a lot about his status in Beirut and the information that he says we're going to get in the next several weeks.
Well, yeah. Now he's on full attack mode, and we can expect this, and we were expecting this, that once he got out that he was going to come to this press conference ready to fight. And that is what he did. Now, some could argue this has been long-winded. You showed some documents there. It's too much for people to digest. They really just want to hear about how you got out of the country. I think Carlos Ghosn's approach is it may be too much information, but I've got to talk, and I'm not going to shut up because I haven't been able to talk since November of 2018. So I think this is the beginning of a very forceful and consistent effort from Carlos Ghosn and his handlers. He's got a crisis management firm that he's working with. He's got lawyers. You can bet that they will be making a very forceful case in the court of public opinion over the next certainly several weeks, if not several months.
He did say he thought he could get a fair trial virtually anywhere in the world. What do we think he wants other than, a declaration of innocence in Japan?
And he's not going to get that, Carl. I mean, I'd be stunned if Japan would drop the charges. I think at a minimum, they always keep those charges out there. Now, he said they could possibly fight the red notice, which would be interesting if Japan would pull that back from Interpol. But I think that Japan, they've got egg on their face on this, big time. I would be stunned if Japan outright drops the charges at some point. I think they're going to keep these out there. I think their feeling is, you know what? You've really pulled one over on us. We're not going to make it easy for you.
While we have you, Phil, I want to get your thoughts on the Boeing crash in Tehran, the 737-8. NTSB now on the wire saying that they are working with state and other agencies to figure out what to do next, monitoring developments. Obviously, international crashes, especially in a country like Iran, pose more difficulties. What should we be thinking here?
Well, it's interesting. This plane was in the air for, less than 2 minutes? I mean, it's sort of weird circumstances that it came down in less than 2 minutes. Ukrainian Airlines out with a statement that given the experience of the crew, they highly doubt that pilot error played a role in this crash. Now, it's too early to know if there was something mechanical that caused this. I should point out, and I was just talking with somebody who made a great point to me on the phone, someone in a veteran of the airline industry. They said 99% of the time when people come out with initial conclusions after a crash, it's wrong.
Phil LeBeau, let's return to Carlos Ghosn.
Talk about it, but just a little bit. But let's start with Renault FCA, please.
This is a very Italian question. A little bit, just a little. No. I had contact with FCA. We had a lot of understanding. We had a very good dialogue. Unfortunately, I was arrested before we could come to a conclusion. But the conclusion was not very far. I had a planned meeting in January for a kind of final conclusion of the deal. In January, I was in the detention center of Kosuge. And as you know, this deal went on, but unfortunately did not happen to Renault. And I think it's a big waste for Renault. I think it's a great opportunity for PSA, but it's a great waste for Renault. That's what I'm saying.
Maryse Burgot pour France Télévisions.
France Télévisions, oui.
Monsieur Ghosn, vous avez dit vous-même que vous avez pris un grand risque en quittant le Japon. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire quel sentiment vous avez eu au moment où vous avez réussi à quitter le Japon? Certains médias ont fait état d'une malle dans laquelle vous auriez été caché.
All right. Kind of wish Ghosn had divided this into sections, maybe an English section, Lebanese, French, but he's going back and forth.
Quite impressive that he's pretty comfortable. Certainly a person of the world, and just facile everywhere, making a great case for himself. But court of what? Court of who? Public opinion is not what keeps you out of jail. Right. I don't know. In the meantime, the frantic buying the NASDAQ is kind of insane. The 5G stocks now caught fire. A lot of that is the excellent reporting we're doing from CES, where the underlying theme, again, is that technology is ahead of where we thought, and that 5G is actually going to be in the numbers. I keep hearing that. I didn't think it would be in the numbers until 2021.
What do you mean in the numbers? What do you mean by that? It's going to actually show up in the earnings of some of these companies?
Exactly.
Just want to make sure.
No, and Colette Kress said something yesterday. She's a brilliant CFO at NVIDIA. She was saying that artificial intelligence will be in the numbers. Inference will be in the numbers. Those are chips that think. Remember, one day we will go into a room of hologram figures that are programmed to tell us how great we look and how great we feel. I am not kidding.
Did you see this Mercedes concept car that does away with the steering wheel? Just basically gets controlled by your biometrics?
This is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
The stuff from CES, can I just say, it's so exciting. I wish I were someone who did gaming. Harman's got these gaming systems. I mean, what did I like about Harman? They have a new boom box.
Right. We should remind people, Harman owned by Samsung.
Right, but
which, by the way, had a rough go of it because of semiconductor sales.
Right, but they did say the numbers were better. Nabith, again, not as bad as feared.
This prelim number, down 34, but still ahead of expectations.
And then look, 34%. Where are all the negative, the housing people? Some people are getting smoked here today. The people who short housing, there are a lot of people who feel that's peaked. Sorry. The people who were short the 5G because they just didn't think it would continue. No. And then remember that the airlines, Delta is up. How the hell is that possible? Because oil's not up. It's an amazing time.
UAL taking this charge in Q4 for Hong Kong disruption, where travel demand has just been obliterated.
Yeah, I've been worried about a lot of businesses that are in Hong Kong. And the one that I've been most concerned about was Estee Lauder. But Fabrizio Freitas, an amazing CEO, has managed to be able to offset it. Some companies can't.
Are the home builders and Depot too, I should mention, outperforming because the bar for the Fed to tighten is so high, even though the ADP, and we'll see what Friday's job number brings.
The orders are extraordinary, saying that the rates have definitely, the rolling rates have definitely played a role. This is not the key selling season. That'll be in a few months. But the margins are going up too, because the raw costs are all down. They broke the raw costs. Lumber's down a lot.
Right.
So you've got this kind of best of all possible worlds. You got rates coming down. You got buyers coming out of the woodwork, which we didn't think could happen.
Inventory's tight still.
Inventory's tight. So, I mean, and then, yes, ADP, the employment numbers. So, I mean, I guess in some ways you have that Panglossian world. The Fed's not going to tighten. Housing's very strong. Retail's very strong. Job growth's strong. No inflation.
Let's just remember the president does speak at 11 a.m. Eastern.
What's he going to talk about?
He obviously will talk about the current status of the current situation with Iran.
I was doing a mind meld.
And I mean, you never know, certainly with this president, where things can go during a potential press conference, at least, or an announcement.
David, does he have an ego system?
But there is certainly hope, yes, that there will be words that sort of de-escalate or continue to.
Well, obviously that's what the stock's saying. Stocks are saying that. Oh, English? Okay, that's good.
Oh, we're back in English.
There have been many stories about how I escaped, who I escaped, and we heard a lot of things which are contradictory, which obviously I'm not going to come back to it. You're going to have always a lot of people who tell you there is no smoke without fire, okay? Which is fair, which always give the advantage to anybody who attacks you. If I'm going to go and tell a lot of story about you, and they are not true, and you have a lot of people around you say, oh, there is no smoke without fire, so no matter how much lies I put, some of them are going to stick to you. This is the advantage of who is on the offensive. And in this case, that's what's happening. I was an easy target. Why? Because I was renowned. I was a foreigner. So it was very easy to say, this guy has overcome all the limits. He has hidden compensation he didn't receive. He has asked for this, etc. It's very easy. It's very easy to do it. Yes, it's true. You're right. A lot of people are going to say, he escaped because he's guilty. But I'm telling you, I didn't escape because I'm guilty. I'm escaped because I had zero chance of a fair trial. And if I have any opportunity to prove, at least for part of the people, I don't care about the people who are going to tell you you're going to be guilty no matter what. You abandon them. Okay? This is a lost battle. But at least the people who are ready to listen to you, at least you'll have the opportunity to talk to them. And this has to go through a fair trial. You know? And the only way I have a fair trial is certainly not in Japan. I have to be outside Japan. It happens I'm in Lebanon today, but I can be in another country. I can be in Brazil. Brazil do not extradite its citizen. It does. France, France does not extradite its citizen. Lebanon does not extradite its citizen. I have 3 countries, and I'm blessed to be citizen of 3 countries who do not extradite their citizen. So in any one of the country, I think I can have a fair trial. Yeah.
Mr. Ron, AP, Associated Press. Associated Press. So I will learn from the Italian question, and I won't ask details about the escape. But
I'm sorry, who are you?
AP, Associated Press.
Thank you.
So when people are calling it already the Great Escape, you've heard all kinds. When was the moment that made you realize it is time to escape? How did you reach that conclusion? And then now that you're here, how did you spend your time in Lebanon since you got here? What was the first thing you did? What are you planning to do for the next while?
Yeah. So the question is, when did I realize? When
you had to plan the escape. When did you start planning the escape? What made you?
When first I lost any hope of fair trial. And I tried. I can tell you, I tried as much as possible. And then when I noticed that the trial was constantly postponed, even though at the beginning the judge told us, I didn't tell you this, but he told us in the session that we had in November that he was going to try to start the trial on the second charge in September 2020. I was very happy. I said, oh, finally, we're going to see the end of the tunnel. End of the tunnel, that means we're talking about 2022. Okay. But then he came on the 25th of December, which was Christmas Day, where we have a pre-trial. And he said, I'm afraid the prosecutor cannot afford to have 2 trials at the same time. Too much work. So what did they say? They say, I cannot promise I'm going to start the second trial in September. So we said, when? Well, he said, I'm not going to commit, but certainly not before 2021. Postpone. And it's always the prosecutor who prevails. Whatever defense says doesn't matter. And second, this is number 1. Number 2 is, I want to see my wife. I mean, the judge was surprised I want to see my wife. But maybe for a lot of people it would have been not a punishment not to see their wife, but for me it was. And they knew it because they have their correspondence with Carol. They knew I love Carol, and she is a pillar for me. They knew this because they had all the correspondence. They get to her email. They were not supposed to have the email. They were not supposed to take her phone. They took everything. They knew all of this. And because they knew all of this, they said, okay, we're going to put him on his knee. We're going to cut him from his wife. And they were right. They put me on my knees. So when I've seen that I couldn't see Carol and I didn't have any horizon to see my wife and have a normal life, I said, what's left? What's left? I have to leave. I have nothing here.
Lebanon, what did you do in Lebanon? What did you do
in Lebanon? So let's see.
No, Monsieur
Okay, allons-y. Who has the microphone?
سكاي نيوز عربية دارين حلوة. لما اخترت لبنان هل حصلت على ضمانات أمنية أو سياسية؟ وما اخترت بلد داني بتحصل على جنسيته واليوم كارلوس غصن ممن يخاف في إجراءات أمنية مشددة اليوم شفنا.
That's Carlos Ghosn, a remarkable press conference this morning in Beirut as he speaks for the first time since fleeing Japan, where he was on bail facing charges of financial corruption, charges which he now denies, and says that he'll be attempting to clear his name in the coming weeks with more evidence. Our Phil LeBeau has been covering this story since the beginning and joins us once again this morning in Chicago. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Carl, I think what struck me the most is that Carlos Ghosn, has said several times that he is willing to stand trial if he believes he can get a fair trial. And if that's in Lebanon, or if it's in Brazil, or if it's in France, wherever he believes he can get a fair trial, he is willing to stand trial. Now, the question becomes, especially for officials in Lebanon, do they say, okay, let's put a trial on here? And then, do the prosecutors in Japan engage? Do they say, okay, we'll come over and we'll present our evidence? I'm skeptical that the prosecutors in Japan will do that. But Carlos Ghosn has been emphatic here in saying, look, I believe that I can prove 100% that I am innocent of these charges. And as a result, you show me a place where I can get a fair trial, and I'm willing to stand trial.
How much do you think Nissan itself and their law firm, who he's trying to implicate this morning, have on the line now?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit they have on the line, which I think ultimately is why I would be surprised if Japanese prosecutors engage with a trial that might be in Lebanon or somewhere else. If it's not in Japan, I don't think that Nissan wants to engage. And now this question becomes for Nissan, and you heard Carlos Ghosn talking about this character assassination. Does Nissan want to engage in a very public tit-for-tat going back and forth with Carlos Ghosn? Yesterday, Nissan came out and blasted Ghosn, saying, you know what, he escaped. That shows that this is the kind of character he has, that he doesn't stay here in Japan, where he's been arrested, where he should be. He's a fugitive. Basically, that's what they were saying. I'm not sure that Nissan is going to engage that way continually, because Ghosn is much more effective than a faceless spokesperson or just a statement from a company in Japan. Now, that may not play in Japan, but Ghosn is definitely playing outside of Japan.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, to that point, earlier he mentioned, I think, the $200 million that Nissan has spent in terms of the investigation versus what he said was, the $15 million or so that they're looking for, that he said obviously had nothing to do with it going to me. And then also mentioned the $10 billion reduction in overall market cap at the company as well. Your thoughts on that?
Well, they've got bigger fish to fry. I mean, this is an alliance. Their alliance with Renault and Mitsubishi is fragile right now. And Nissan, and the strategy that Carlos Ghosn employed for a number of years. Look, he's not off the hook in terms of how the company was underperforming starting in 2017 and 18. The strategy for a long time, especially here in North America, was pump out the cars, jump up the incentives. You have got to move the metal as much as possible. We want to get market share. Market share, market share, market share. Well, it's come home to roost, especially at Nissan. And they are really feeling the effects of that right now. So they've got bigger issues, David, in terms of getting the alliance to function properly. I mean, take a look at shares of Nissan. I don't know if you can call it up in the control room. They're down 35% since the arrest of Carlos Ghosn.
Yeah, which he was quick to point out. Phil, stand by for us. I want to also bring in right now David McGee. He's the author of Turnaround, how Carlos Ghosn rescued Nissan. That, of course, before all of this occurred. David, I know you've been listening in. Just give me your thoughts here in terms of what you've heard from Mr. Ghosn, particularly in light of the fact that you know the man well, having written a book about him.
Right. I do know Carlos Ghosn well. And, look, I don't think he's a crook. But Carlos Ghosn pushed the envelope from the minute he took the job at Nissan and then bringing this alliance together. And, he pushes boundaries, and I think it's like speeding. I mean, he probably got caught to some degree. Now, he says he's willing to stand trial. I believe him if he says that publicly, so we'll see.
Well, what do you think then occurred if he was being aggressive? You heard his defense, I assume. That's the first hour or so. Was not him taking questions. It was him actually presenting slides and things that supported his contention that he never took or embezzled any money at all from the company.
Yeah, and I don't think that I've not seen any evidence of what's come out so far. I guess, did he borrow money at some point, and was that unethical for a short term? The compensation thing, I saw him say today, I never was actually paid that compensation. And he makes a great point on that. It's kind of a hard case to prove. He didn't receive it. So I think he's like, hey, I see your smoke, but I'm not sure there's the fire here that you think. And Carlos Ghosn is no fool. I doubt he pushes the envelope, and he's admitted that. He pushes the envelope, but I don't think that, he'd like a fair trial. He says he'll stand trial. I believe he would. There may be something there, but is he a crook? I doubt it. Are they suffering without him? Clearly they are.
And David, that's sort of the point I was going to bring up. Certainly your work on the book was well before any of this arrest happened. Since the arrest, Phil LeBeau pointed out, Nissan shares are down about 35%. I can imagine if you're sitting at Nissan, you just want all of this to be over and done with in some way or another.
Frankly, Nissan in Japan would be better off to let this go. Carlos Ghosn, I still can't get my arms around this miraculous escape.
You know what, David? We're going to go back to Mr. Ghosn. He is now answering questions in English.
That's, I can tell you. And for the moment, they all think that consensual decision-making is one way to make the lions live. It's wrong. And you know who's wrong and who's right? Look at the results. That's the only way you're going to know who is right and who is wrong in a business. You look at the results. You look at the growth, you look at the bottom line, and you look at the evolution. Well, when I look at what happened for the last 13 months, with everything that happened, I'm not reassured about the future of the lines. Yes.
Monsieur Ghosn, James André pour France 24.
Monsieur, là-bas, oui. Ah bon, vous avez dans la parole. Allez-y.
Ben oui.
Allez-y.
Donc oui, James André pour France 24. Je voulais simplement savoir, votre vie évidemment était passée au crible suite à cette affaire dans les médias, partout. On vous a présenté souvent comme ayant, on va dire, atteint un niveau où vous étiez déconnecté des réalités.
All right, let's take it back now that we're in French. Of course, we're all multilingual here. We can understand Lebanese, French, English, whatever they may throw at us. David, you were finishing answering Courtney's question. Go ahead.
Yeah, where were we? I was amazed by how he speaks in multiple languages.
Yeah, we were talking about Nissan and how I imagine if you're sitting there and you're one of the executives trying to run the company, you just want this over with one way or another.
I believe that Nissan in Japan would be best to just let this go and say, the man escaped. I'm not sure what we can do, and drop it. Their business is suffering. Look, Carlos Ghosn was about to pull a miracle for France, which is arrange a merger, a full merger between Nissan and Renault, and he would have been a hero in France, and they would have built statues about him. They didn't want that in Japan. They wanted to keep Nissan, a Japanese company. And so then they stepped in with this coup, as he calls it. And, at this point, maybe it's time everybody go their own way and let Carlos Ghosn go and move on.
I mean, he did just answer a question this morning saying what he was ready to propose was a holding company rather than a full merger. But regardless, I wonder what you think the future holds for Nissan in terms of their ability to attract partners in the future.
Well, we 20 years ago when Carlos Ghosn took over, we were moving into this flattened world, and the world was flat, and you could work without boundaries. The world's not so flat as it was, and there's a little more retrenching. And so we're moving into a different era than what Carlos Ghosn entered when he took over 20 years ago. I think Nissan in Japan, we're seeing some of the same pullbacks in business in China. That's a big question is, how global are we going to be?
All right, we apologize for the back and forth, but Ghosn is mixing it up in terms of language. This is an answer in English.
There are widespread perceptions around the world that the Lebanese justice system is not up to handling a trial such as yours. Do you really think that you can clear your name in front of an international audience?
Okay, no, I understand. First, I don't agree with you. I think we have very competent people in Lebanon. But frankly, when it comes to corrupt system, my first idea is not about Lebanon.
Yeah. ITN television news of the UK. Mr. Ghosn, I understand you don't want to talk about the manner of your escape for fear perhaps of implicating friends and colleagues. But it's a moment of great drama. Can you tell us your feelings, your emotion when you got into the packing case, your emotions when you got on the plane to freedom?
I told you from November 19, 2018 to the 30th of December 2019, until I met my wife, who was the first person I met when I arrived at the house of her parents in Lebanon. I was numb. I numbed myself. I had no feeling. I try not to have feeling, because when you have feeling, you're in danger when you are in a situation like this. So, if you tell me what are your feelings, yes, obviously I was nervous, I was tense, I was anxious, I was hopeful, but frankly, I spent a period of time, I don't know, probably people who are specialized in this can explain to you, I was like numb. I've been like a kind of nightmare for the 13 months. Started November 19, finished the 30th of December, you know, and the nightmare started when I saw the face of the prosecutor, and it ended when I saw the face of my wife.
Would you recommend the packing case as a means of travel?
I'm sorry?
Would you recommend the packing case as a means of travel?
Okay, maybe 5 more minutes and then we're going to have to stop. Yeah. Okay. Hands. And then you. Hands.
No, I'm Hans.
No, he's Hans.
Thank you, Mr. Go. I have a couple of questions. The first one is about, you paint a really sorry picture about the state of the alliance and where it's going. You staked your reputation as a revival artist, made that reputation at Nissan. Can you give us a 3-step program to how you would revive the alliance if you were still in charge at this point? If you were parachuted in there, what would you do to reboot this alliance? What needs to happen? Second question, hold on, I'll jump in one second. How do you feel about Renault? What are your feelings towards Renault? They rushed to judgment too quickly and evict you from office without due process. So you say a lot about Nissan, but what are your feelings about Renault?
The first thing is what I would do. Obviously, I'm not gonna tell you what would be my program, but I've always said there is no problem without a solution, and you can always fix a situation no matter what it is. But what I can tell you is what I will do is completely different from what's being done. So that's for sure. The second point is I'm not talking about Renault, because today the topic is not about Renault. Today the topic is about I left Japan. I'm explaining to you why I left Japan and everything which happened to me in Japan, which is linked to Nissan, and somehow which linked to the lines. Renault is not in the loop. That's why I didn't talk about Renault, and that's why I'm not intending to talk, not to deviate the attention from the main topic. Sir.
Monsieur Ghosn, Julien Fautra pour la radio RTL. On parlait de l'embauche de votre sœur. C'est peut-être une erreur, peut-être une faute, j'en sais rien. Ma question porte sur la moralisation.
All right, let's come back out, of course, as we continue to monitor Carlos Ghosn. Also want to bring in former GM Vice Chair Bob Lutz, who joins us oftentimes on all things auto-related. Bob, we've certainly been listening to this extraordinary press conference and his discussion of why he's innocent, not really talking a lot about his escape, but also spending some time on the fundamentals of the business itself. You know, I'm curious, what are your thoughts about Carlos Ghosn and the time that he has not been at the helm of Nissan Renault, and what the future holds for that company?
Well, I think business is tough all over right now, and it's especially tough for Nissan, which for a long time had been buying market share with a lot of discounts and eroding profitability while maintaining market share, and that's never a good thing. And this was partly due to Carlos Ghosn's edict-driven leadership, where he would tell Nissan, I want X% market share by such and such a date. And that's basically the way he governed a company. He would rule by edict, and then everybody would do whatever it took to make it. Well, when you're talking about sales, a lot of times the salespeople will respond by saying, okay, we'll make the number, but we'll do whatever it takes to get there. And then they give away too much money, and you have what's called profitless prosperity, which is you're selling a lot of vehicles, but nothing hits the bottom line. And that's Nissan's problem right now, and they're struggling with that. But, you know, the world is tough automotively all around. And Nissan, I'm sure, will survive, and there's no question that when Carlos Ghosn took over the helm of Nissan, he did do things that were unheard of in Japan, like closing plants and laying off employees, and managed to save the company. So he certainly deserves credit for that.
you believe that those actions in part were one of the reasons why the Japanese were focused on him when they at least alleged that there was misdeeds at the company?
I have no idea. I mean, it requires a leap of the imagination to imagine that one of the world's largest democracies and one of the world's largest automobile companies would conspire to rig a judicial system as a means of imprisoning an internationally renowned businessman, former hero of Japan, where little kids would wear T-shirts with Carlos Ghosn's picture on them. Japanese business schools were teaching the new Carlos Ghosn way and so forth. It's hard to believe that a large corporation would conspire with the Japanese government to let's get rid of him this way. Let's put him in jail and let him rot in a cell. I just find that extraordinarily hard to believe. So right now we're at the situation where we don't know whom to believe. Do you believe Nissan and the Japanese government, or do you believe Carlos Ghosn that he is totally innocent and that he's never done anything wrong and never gone against the law, that the Japanese judicial system is rigged and operating in cahoots with Nissan? So we're just going to have to see how this plays out. One thing is for certain right now, he is a fugitive from justice. Whether that justice is good, bad, rigged, unrigged, or indifferent, but the point is, he is a fugitive from justice right now, and that's not going to make for a comfortable life.
Mr. Lutz, I know that previously you had said you're not sure if he's guilty, but you're not sure if he's innocent either. Either way, he has an awful lot of money and was able to plan this escape and execute it as such. What kind of message do you think that sends other executives that may find themselves in sort of similar legal situations, that enough money can get you a way out of it?
Well, I honestly, in the history of the corporate world around the globe, I can't recall another instance where the simultaneous CEO of several large companies has been put in jail and just kept there and finally has had to plan his own escape. So, but I think the message is, one, there are several messages here. If you assume Carlos Ghosn's innocence, it tells you that we should be grateful every day for the American judicial system, where there is a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And you can't be held for a certain amount of, more than a certain amount of time without charges being pressed, et cetera, et cetera. So we're sometimes frustrated with our system and think it moves too slowly. Throw the guy in jail and get it done with. But it does ensure the rights of the person accused. So that's one lesson. The second lesson is, yes, it does send the deplorable message that if you have enough money and you're intelligent enough to plot an escape, you can use your brains and your money to get yourself out of a situation. And, that's a message we really don't like, because we're all supposed to be equal before the law.
To our viewers this morning, if you're just joining us, a remarkable press conference from Carlos Ghosn in Beirut. The first time he has spoken since fleeing Japan, where he was on bail, facing charges of financial corruption. Markets obviously have rebounded from the events of last night. Iran claims responsibility for these missile attacks on 2 Iraqi bases where American troops are housed. Dow futures down 400 overnight. Right now, you got the Dow up 44, NASDAQ 9,100 for the first time. That's an all-time high. Bob, he did say this morning he regrets not having taken a job offer at GM back in 2009. Can you talk about the history of how close he came to working at GM?
Well, I can tell you that I was obviously there at the time, and what was proposed was that GM joined the alliance of Renault and Nissan, and I think they even had Mitsubishi in it at the time, and he would become CEO. None of us were in favor of this scheme, and as I said previously on this program, the problem with an alliance as opposed to a merger is there's no defined way to split the profit or split the costs or split the investments. It's just like, well, we'll do you a favor and then you do us a favor back. Well, as we know in business, that rarely works out. And I don't think he was already CEO of Nissan, already CEO of Renault. How could he be CEO of GM at the same time? So it's possible that at one time, without any knowledge on my part, the board reached out to him and said, would you be willing to come to General Motors? But I think his terms were, yes, but General Motors gets folded into the alliance. And that came up for discussion several times, and we never wanted that. And frankly, I don't think that Carlos Ghosn's particular method of operation would have been compatible with General Motors, and General Motors has done just fine under Mary Barra.
Bob, while I have you, as I think we're looking at the end of the Ghosn press conference, and we'll check in with Michelle if we can in a few minutes, I got to ask you about Tesla. Doubling in 6 months. You've been on repeatedly, skeptical about Musk himself, skeptical about the product. What is going on at Tesla?
I think they've achieved a sort of a volume breakthrough with the plant in China opening and selling a lot of Model 3s. Model 3 is doing extremely well in Europe. So I think what's happening is the Model 3, after a relatively slow start, is finally accelerating, and it is. The interesting thing is it's not the affordable $33,000 everyman's EV. It has really become positioned at about $55,000 to $60,000, and buyers see it as an alternative to a high-performance BMW 3 Series or a Mercedes. So as long as they can keep that premium pricing, which is, as I say, about $30,000 over where they had originally talked about, obviously that car is going to be profitable. So I think the vehicle was misplanned. At $33,000, it never would have made any money. At $55,000 to $60,000, that vehicle will make probably as high a contribution margin as the original Model S. So, and then the other thing that Elon has done, which I frankly talked about endlessly, he has finally reined in his cost, and he's reduced personnel and reduced unnecessary expenditures, and he's basically done what any other businessman would do in a situation where you're selling a bunch of stuff but you're not profitable. That tells you have to cut costs, and he has been quite adept at the encouraging thing to me about Tesla is from Elon, there's less talk, less bluster, less here's what I'm going to do in 6 months. And it seems like he's done what any other CEO or founder would do. He is focusing on the business, focusing on the product, and focusing on cost control. So Tesla is finally being run like a normal business. So as long as it...
Bob, thank you for that. Bob Lutz covering all kinds of auto news. We do want to check in with Michelle Caruso-Cabrera in Beirut on the heels of that presser. Michelle?
Yeah, it was a marathon, wasn't it, Carl? More than 2 hours, nearly 2 hours and 20 minutes that Carlos Ghosn took questions from more than 100 members of the press assembled here in Lebanon, where he has escaped from the Japanese legal system. Just some color as a reporter, how solicitous he is of the press. He made sure he would ask, did every nationality get to ask a question? Because there were so many nationalities here. He was also at the beginning actually wanted to run the Q&A like he was a talk show host and move out in the audience and point to people himself directly and hand out the mic. But then the cameraman in the back said, please go back to the podium because we can't shoot you clearly if you do that. And so he did. He did acknowledge, when asked by a Japanese reporter if they had screened and reduced and limited the number of Japanese press, and he didn't say yes, but he certainly alluded to the fact that some Japanese press were kept out because he felt that while he was in Japan, that they were too in cahoots, so to speak, with the prosecutor's office there, and that they weren't objective enough about his case. He couldn't escape on Middle East politics either. I don't think you carried the entire news conference, but there were two questions in Arabic where he was asked, why did you go to Israel? Why did you shake hands with the leaders of Israel? One Lebanese reporter said, you shook hands with an individual who has Lebanese blood on his hand. Why did you do that? And he said, I didn't go there as a Lebanese citizen. I went there as an auto executive. We were signing a deal. That's what we had to do. I didn't realize what pain that would cause the Lebanese people. Do you apologize? He says, yes, of course I do. So that was a very interesting, a reminder that we're here in a part of the world where Hezbollah, deeply influenced by Iran, is ever present in the parliament and has a large chunk of control of the country of Lebanon. When it comes to all the charges that have been lodged against him in various countries, or at least allegations and accusations, he tried to refute them one-on-one. And we'll wait to be seen whether or not he's managed to convince the court of public opinion, whether he's successful about that. Over and over again, he declined to answer questions about his escape, except one point was interesting. He was asked by a Brazilian reporter, well, you have a Brazilian passport. Why didn't you go to Brazil? There's no extradition rule there either. And he said, right, but we had to stop in one place to get there. And then he was suggesting almost that Brazil was too far in order, in terms of how much gas you're going to put on a private plane in order to travel. So, and then once he realized he was starting to talk about that, he cut himself off. But of course, the juiciest stuff that people really wanted to hear about, this international caper that he masterminded, we didn't get details about that. It was mostly him defending himself against the Japanese legal system. Back to you.
Michelle, I wonder if it's your gut feeling right now if he will be happy to clear his name, or if he's also interested in exacting revenge on the prosecutors or the executives that he believed did him wrong.
Well, he certainly went through the names. He listed names at the beginning of the news conference of people that he thought were complicit or out to get him or working against him. I mean, he sounds like a man who would be very happy with revenge. He didn't say that explicitly, but that wouldn't surprise me. He's very eager to clear his name. He says he knows that he has to stay in Lebanon for the near term and the immediate term, but he suggested that he was convinced that eventually he would be able to travel, suggesting that he thinks he is going to be able to clear his name, even if he doesn't stand trial in Japan.
Michelle, back to your earlier point about the Japanese media being in the room. You're right, we weren't able to carry the entire press conference because of the different languages that were being switched in and out. Were the questions from the Japanese media any different in their tone or in their content from what we were able to hear from the English-speaking journalists?
So not all of them were translated. So most of them were in Japanese. Two were in English. The ones that were Japanese I couldn't understand, and not all translation was perfect here. But one in English was, "You broke Japanese law by leaving Japan. What do you say to the Japanese people about that?" And he said, "I love the Japanese people, and I think the Japanese people should know they deserve a better legal system than what they have, and a 99.4% conviction rate is something that they should be concerned about."
Our Michelle Cursa Cabrera in Beirut. What a story, Michelle. Our thanks to you. We'll obviously talk again soon. Our thanks to Bob Lutz as well, and to David. Meantime, geopolitical tensions are ramping up in the Middle East after this retaliatory strike from Iran on U.S. forces in Iraq overnight. The president is expected to deliver remarks at 11 a.m. Eastern in about half an hour. We're going to take you live as soon as he begins. In the meantime, Eamon Javers of the White House can talk about the atmosphere at the White House last night and what we might expect today. Eamon?
Yeah, Carl, I can tell you that the president has been in the Situation Room this morning, according to multiple White House officials, and he's been there with the vice president, also the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and other officials, I'm told. Those officials, we may see them in the grand foyer, rather, of the White House in about a half an hour's time alongside the president. We'll wait and see whether the president appears alone to make these comments or whether he's flanked by officials and military brass as well. We don't know what the president's going to say here. Presumably by now he's got the bomb damage assessment of what happened exactly at the bases in Iraq where U.S. troops have been stationed, what casualties, if any, they have sustained. No official confirmation of any of that just yet. So presumably the president can inform the country just simply the results of last night's attack and then, of course, what he plans to do about it, if anything. We saw this tweet from the president last night saying all is well and reassuring the country and the world that everything appears good so far. He said so far so good, but that is now more than 10 hours ago. So we can expect probably an update there in terms of the situation and what he plans to do next. But tonally, in terms of the content, White House officials keeping these comments very close to the vest right now, not giving us any indication or any excerpts of what the president plans to say at the top of the hour, Carl.
Eamon, Reuters is reporting that, quoting some sources here, that Iran's believed to have deliberately sought to avoid military casualties in their missile strikes last night. I wonder if the president, in his remarks, will go that far.
Yeah, well, we don't know. It does sort of feel that way, given the number of options on the menu that the Iranian leadership had to choose from, and giving that Homeland Security advisory that we saw yesterday of all the different things that the Iranians could do as a response. This is just one of those many different options that the Iranians could have chosen from. Nonetheless, U.S. intelligence will be working hard to figure out what Iranian intent is here. Is this just the first wave of a series of responses? Is this now contained and over with? What is the messaging behind the scenes between these two governments? All of that, of course, impossible for us to know standing here on the driveway outside the White House, but presumably in the Situation Room, they're getting as good a picture as they can get of Iranian leadership and what Iranian leadership is trying to accomplish here.
All right, Eamon, we'll see in a few minutes. Eamon Jabbers outside the White House this morning. Dow's up 4 points now. Some choppy trade, obviously, especially overnight. Let's turn to the market impact of all the stories that have been swirling in the past 24 hours. Schwab's Jeff Kleintop joins us, Bob McNally and Stratford, senior global analyst. Good to see you guys. Thanks for the time today. Jeff, Journal has a piece about traders in the oil markets losing their faith in any kind of geopolitical rally. And I wonder if you can extend that to equities. It doesn't seem like geopolitics moves much of anything, at least in the short term.
Yeah, the language of the markets is really easy to interpret here. It's a classic, almost textbook response to U.S. military strikes. Unfortunately, we have more than 30 years of these military strikes to take a look at and see what the market's reaction is. And it's classic. In the first day, you see a modest but significant negative response. And then over the next 5 days, usually markets have fully recovered those losses. And that's where we are again. But, Carl, that's usually in a backdrop where the global economy is stabilizing or growing. And that's, in fact, what we're seeing. Global leading indicators are showing signs of upticks. Analysts are actually raising their earnings estimates for the first time in a year or so. This is all fairly good news, and markets I think are focusing on that, something they have a little bit more confidence in than the uncertainty associated with the fog of war.
Bob, I'm just looking here at the price of oil, and we are actually seeing it fall here by more than 2%, but we also did just get this unexpected rise in oil inventories up 1.164 million barrels, and the market had been expecting that to come down 3.2 million. That seems to be moving things much more than what we had seen in the Middle East.
That's right, Courtney. We're in a tug of war between bearish supply and demand fundamentals for oil, particularly in the first half of the year with global surpluses well over 1 million barrels a day on the one hand, and then the surprise return late last week of geopolitical risk on the other. We've completely undone the premium that went in since the hit on Soleimani. So the market is erring on the side or going with the weak fundamentals for the moment. I think that's misplaced and complacent, but that's definitely where the market is right now.
Why do you think that's misplaced and complacent, Bob?
Well, my firm has a 1 in 4 odds that this rapid scampering up the ladder of escalation with Iran will lead to a general war. That's easily a $30 scenario, and 25% of $30 is about $7.50. So we think we need to see about a $3 to $10 risk premium into crude. We think Iran, while continuing to stop short of killing Americans, because that would unleash that war scenario, which we don't expect, but still is 1 in 4, we think the market has some more risk pricing to do. Iran is not done. Last night it made clear that countries that host U.S. bases are on the table for a retaliation. We think there's more to come, and that'll put more of a bid in crude. So geopolitics is coming back.
Jeff, it seems that the market does not believe what Bob is saying here right now, as we're holding on to some marginal gains. Even the price of gold just about flat to down at this point. Do you think the worst of the worry for the markets at least is behind us? We saw that huge drop in futures, and that seems to be well in the rearview mirror at this point.
Yeah, the markets are viewing this as a flare-up in a long-term conflict. And, you know, gosh, if markets waited for the all-clear of conflict in the Middle East, they never go up at all, right? So this is an environment where markets are focusing more on what they know. We're headed into the earnings season. That looks to be another environment where companies are likely to beat expectations. And again, even in the weakest part of the global markets, the manufacturing sector, we've seen things firm up a little bit. And I note on oil prices, gosh, if we saw another $30 jump there in the context of a very strong labor market right now and the supply situation in the U.S., it's hard to see the big negative economic impact that could tip us into a recession or reverse some of the stability we've seen in manufacturing or on the consumer side of the equation.
So at this point, Jeff, do you think multiples are just about right? Why would you bid on this market unless you, I guess you believe multiples have more to expand?
I'm not sure it has to come from multiples. I think for the first time in a year or so, we might see it in earnings. This year, earnings expectations are looking for maybe 9 to 10% growth. It could be a little optimistic, but still solid single-digit growth in earnings for the first time in a year or so could be good news. We could actually see it on the E instead of the P of the PE in terms of a market improvement. And that could set us up for a year where the economy looks better this year than it did last year, but markets maybe don't produce the same type of gains because it's not coming from valuation. It's coming from a more fundamental basis in earnings.
Bob, you know, on Twitter, Iran's foreign minister indicated that the action was sort of it. That was the end. They don't want further escalation. But if your firm is still pricing in a 1 in 4 chance of a war, what's the long-term risk? What's the next tipping point or catalyst that could see things change from where we sit right now?
Right. Well, the supreme leader, who is the boss of Zarif, the foreign minister, tweeted last night that last night's attacks were not enough. It's a slap in the face, but it wasn't enough. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a statement last night saying, we're going after countries that host U.S. bases. So while we think Iran will continue to stop short of killing American officials and invading our embassies and so forth, because we learned that that gets a disproportionate response from President Trump, we think they're still going to try to eject the United States from the region by attacking facilities and bases and even oil facilities of countries allied with us in the region. And so we don't think the vengeance campaign, the revenge campaign, if you will, is over. It's just begun.
Jeff, Bob, thank you, guys. We'll keep an eye on the market. Obviously, a lot of cross currents today. In fact, on those cross currents, joining us on the phone today is former Goldman Sachs Asset Management Chair Jim O'Neill. We like to call him Lord O'Neill. It's good to have you back, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Nice to speak to you. Happy New Year.
So many things to talk about. I'm not sure where you want to start, but I guess what do you think is the driving force behind the action right now?
I think there's a number of things. Obviously, in the past, since Thursday, the Middle Eastern situation has thrown in a new issue. But as I was just listening to your discussion, on one level, is it really new? And I'm not surprised at the market's reaction. In fact, I think given the very specific statements that the Iranians made this morning after the attacks suggest that they, rightly or wrongly, in my judgment and their comment, don't want to escalate it dramatically. So I think the market for now is being logical in oil and related pricing. Away from that, and here's I don't know if this has been raised. In a strange way, I find my mind thinking for the Fed, it might be a bit like how they've been reacting to other sort of unforeseen events, particularly the trade spat with China, that anything that comes up that can threaten growth that immediately adds to the Fed wanting to be friendly, which of course translate into being liquidity and policy-wise bullish for equities.
Jim, it's funny you mentioned the trade, China trade. It's something we haven't discussed probably in a few days after years of doing it virtually every day. We're not far away, we think, from that phase one signing. What's it going to mean for the economies of countries you know well, both emerging markets and Europe? Is it going to be a positive that we see reflections of in 2020?
Well, interestingly, and partly why I raise it, we have got already tentative evidence from some of the most sensitive economies to this that their economies have, at a minimum, stabilized and maybe picked up a little. That includes China itself, if you look at their latest PMIs, but also, crucially, the likes of Germany. So whilst the last 6 months of the world economy of 2019 essentially saw a continuous weakening of the world economy, as we turn the corner, it looks like at a minimum we've stabilized and maybe doing a bit better. On top of that, giving further support in the minds of market participants to equities at least, here in the UK we are almost definitely looking at a significant fiscal stimulus from the Johnson government, and we may be getting more fiscal stimulus in other places, possibly Germany as well. So I think some of the fears about growth weakening so much that would head into recession in some places is definitely fading, and it's, for the time being, that is appropriate.
So you've discussed growth in the United States, Germany, the UK. What about the emerging markets? What's your outlook there for 2020? Do things look to be improving?
Well, as I said, with China itself, obviously, if this so-called stage one deal is heralding an elongated pause, that is definitely good for the Chinese economy. In addition, and I should have said this already, the Chinese have cut reserve requirements over the holidays and seem to be doing quite a bit to stimulate their economy too. And so I would imagine, given their importance, the mood about many emerging markets, with one or two notable exceptions, is probably in the process of improving too. I think there are a couple of spanners in the works away from the Middle Eastern political jitters. India's had a very challenging last quarter to 2019, economically and politically, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about that. Obviously, the Hong Kong issue is still bubbling away, so one has to be very careful, and I suspect for markets it means things are going to be not with the same kind of low volatility we had for much of last year, but I think the improved mood is definitely warranted, primarily because of the US-China situation and fiscal policy in some places outside the States.
Hey, Jim, there's been a lot of discussion about how much specificity the market is craving once we get at least a multi-page text of this phase one agreement. How much do you think the market is depending on that, or will they be happy with something that's vague but accompanied by constructive commentary out of U.S. corporates on Q4?
I think the latter. I think the market knows that there's a lot of long-term issues between the U.S. and China, but so long as there is, let's call it an election-related ceasing of active hostilities, and that Trump will not want this issue to negatively affect the momentum of the economy as the election year gets going, I think the markets will be quite relieved about that and focus on earnings coming out of Q4.
If you were still running a broad portfolio, would you be looking for the U.S. to underperform this year for any reason, inflation or anything else, or because of past gains? Would you be looking to Europe or EM? How do you think on a global basis the U.S. stacks up?
I think there's two big contradictory signals. First of all, if you look at it from a pure economic perspective, as I said at the start, definite signs of the rest of the world stabilizing, and given that valuations are so much more friendly or less expensive outside the US, both those factors would strongly favor non-US markets, in my view, as we saw some signs of in December, of course. But against that, you have a Fed that seems to be trying to be pretty generous still, and a sort of generally supportive cyclical momentum in the US. And obviously, a lot of the key sectoral drivers globally are essentially coming out of the US. So I think it is a bit trickier, but if I had to pick one or the other, I slightly favor non-US markets outperforming the US. Particularly in terms of value, I mean, certainly if you apply multi-year type things, EM is definitely the more attractive place to be.
And do you think the Fed would be willing or able to look past a run-up in crude if, in fact, Iran turned out to be something that was not short-term?
So in a kind of normal world, if one can think of such things, or certainly normal for the length of duration I've followed these things, you know, and I saw that very interesting interview you guys had with Stan Druckenmiller over the holidays. You know, I'm kind of a bit with Stan there. In that world, you know, it's hard to figure out why the Fed is being as friendly as it is now, but every time there seems to be some kind of threat to the economy, it just adds to the Fed's friendliness. So I do think at some stage during the year, possibly this quarter, if they see more and more signs of the world doing better, and importantly, this tentative evidence in the second half of last year that wages, particularly for lower paid people, are continue to pick up, then we could see the Fed shift away from this scale of friendliness, which ironically would be a challenge to the market. But it looks to me like the Fed's just sort of almost on autopilot for friendliness, despite the fact it doesn't seem overly necessary. But for the markets, that's great.
Hey, Jim, I'd love to come back to India with you for a moment. You'd mentioned it, of course. Huge protests through the country. Modi certainly, in terms of Muslims doing certain things that are being opposed, broadly speaking. The economy slowing. I mean, what's the overall take there in a country that you've spent a lot of time, obviously, studying?
I'm a bit. I can't. I'm sort of thinking about it in almost occasionally how I've thought about Putin in Russia, that maybe Modi, in an attempt to, it's peculiar, hence why I hesitate, but in a way, in an attempt to keep the scale of his popularity with the majority Hindus, you know, is very attractive to repeatedly taking this strong nationalistic rhetoric, and the line he is on Muslims, which, as troubling as it is, and I think it is troubling for people from my kind of way of looking at life, you know, there is a strong majority Hindu population, and it probably plays popularly to many of the less educated classes in that sense. But I can only rationalize it as the motive for him to do it is because the economy is struggling and he's not delivering on taking or hundreds of thousands or tens of millions out of poverty into the middle classes, which is what he's supposed to be doing. And I think it's a bit troubling medium term. India, as everybody knows, is going through this remarkable sweet spot with demographics, and it should be potentially capable of growing by close to 10%, and we ended last year growing at something close to half that rate. And so it's a bit of a mess, it seems to me, and I personally would think people want to be a little bit careful for a country and a market that's had a spectacular rally for many years, of course.
Bringing it back to the U.S., you spoke a bit about the Federal Reserve. We did not yet talk to you about your thoughts on the actions they're taking in the repo market, injecting $100 billion overnight Tuesday, a little less last night. I understand the Journal reporting $46.6 billion. How long do you think this is going to be necessary for the Federal Reserve, and do you believe this is the right course of action and something we shouldn't be scared about, but is just sort of greasing the plumbing of the system?
I'm gonna plead ignorance, stroke stupidity. I'm not close enough to follow these things, so I read about it, and it seems to me the Fed obviously is aware of some market-related issues involving banks and maybe borrowed funds by hedge funds that they've got to make sure doesn't cause serious spikes and liquidity challenges on a day-to-day basis. And I would imagine by the second week of the year at the latest that they'll all be resolved. But I could be wrong. I know nothing about it really. But the broader issue is I don't really quite understand where the Fed's ultimately coming from, other than almost religiously following a sort of almost like an ECB inflation mandate. It seems to me that at some stage down the road, the economy will need a lot more supportive Fed, and the longer the Fed stays easy now when they don't really need to be, the more difficult that will be, given the absolute level of rates. So I'm a bit confused by it, but it's obviously a very generous policy, which is giving all sorts of insurances and is a net major positive for equity markets in the US and globally.
That certainly has been a boon for equities, as you point out, Jim. Live shot here at the White House as we're awaiting the president at the top of the hour. He spent the morning in the Situation Room, NBC News says, with the vice president, the secretary of state, the defense secretary, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It sort of brings us to politics, Jim. Market's done a lot of hand-wringing in the past several months about various candidates on the Democratic side. I wonder if you think it's going to have as big a role, the primaries, the caucuses, the race for delegates, as some believe, as we get deeper into election season.
Yeah, I was reading the past few days of various people making big bets related to when the Democratic primaries start to give some clarity as to who the probable candidate will be. I'm not sure that's so rational against the background of policy being so positive from the Fed. It's obviously really important for various sectors, and ultimately, if you have a Warren on the left emerging, then that probably would be a negative. But whether that's a big bet to be making so early in the election season, I have no idea, because obviously, I would be dubious about that, because I also read overnight that some interesting people are coming out in favor of Mike Bloomberg, and some might see him as a more credible, globally enhancing version of what is represented by the Republicans under Trump. So that might be extremely positive. But I'm not sure I'd want to be making such a big bet on that right now. But obviously, as the year develops, it's going to be a huge issue.
It is still early days, to be sure. Jim, thanks so much. We covered so much ground with you. We always appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Happy New Year again.
Thank you, Jim. Well, we're going to stick with the impact on oil prices right now. Joining us on the phone from the region, RBC Capital's global head of commodity strategy, Halima Croft. Halima, thank you for joining us. I see a move here in crude prices after the inventory number came out, a rise in inventories unexpectedly, 1.16 million barrels, when the market was looking for a drawdown of 3.2. That seems to be actually the bigger swing in reason for prices rather than the geopolitical tension in the Middle East. Am I reading that right?
Well, I think right now you have a situation where oil prices certainly spiked when we had the missiles being fired at the U.S. bases in Iraq. But then there was a sense quickly that developed, that this was essentially one and done, that the Iranians had done enough, as the foreign minister had said. There were no U.S. casualties, and President Trump basically said, all is well. And so I think the market right now is looking beyond the immediate crisis that we've had since the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and they're now focusing on other issues. That said, I do not believe that the Iraqi missile strikes is where this story ends. Iran remains under crippling sanctions. They are likely to still use their proxy groups to foment unrest in the Middle East. But again, from the standpoint of the oil market, I think they are starting to look past this story for now.
And so if that's true and this is not the end of the escalation, but the oil market is still looking past the moves, does that not move the price of Brent or WTI going forward if we see a further escalation? Is this just something the market at this point is moving past because the U.S., for instance, has so much more production than it did a number of years ago?
I mean, the oil market consistently since spring has basically faded very big geopolitical stories that were really quite seismic in terms of attacks on Middle Eastern energy infrastructure. We've had tankers struck in the Straits of Hormuz starting in May. We've had tankers seized. And then in September, we had the major attacks on Saudi Aramco's oil facilities that took half of Saudi's production offline. Because Saudi Arabia was able to bring back that production very quickly, I think a lot of market participants don't believe we will have a major sustained supply outage. But if we were to get significant attacks on energy infrastructure, which we cannot rule out, especially in places like Iraq where U.S. companies operate, if we were to get major attacks on energy infrastructure, tankers actually being sunk, then I think prices would move higher.
Halima, we're still seeing stories that argue we're in a different chapter of Iranian capability and threats, that drones change the game somehow. Do you believe that?
Absolutely.
Coming off of the
No, I mean
you do.
Absolutely. I mean, I was made multiple trips to the region after September 14th, and what we were consistently told was that the drone technology has changed the game. Patriot air defense missile shields are not going to work against the type of drones that were deployed on September 14th. So if the Iranians would like to be destructive to energy infrastructure, they can still use the drones, they can still use the low-flying cruise missiles, so they still retain optionality to be very disruptive to Middle East oil supplies.
Halima, thank you so much for your time. It's an important story. With your help, we'll understand it better. Halima Croft from RBC.
Thank you.
Down about 33 points here. We are awaiting the president, obviously, who will speak in the Grand Foyer in a few moments, having decided not to address the nation last night. Eamon Javers can help us understand what's coming up in the next few minutes. Eamon?
Yeah, Carl, one process point here, and you can see it from the live shot on our screen right now. The White House has now opened this up to the entire White House press corps. So there's a flood of reporters going in for the president's remarks here. Earlier, it was scheduled just to be the pool, which would have been a much smaller group of reporters. That may, and I stress may here, indicate that the president is of a mind to take some questions from the press corps here. And that might give us a sense of what his state of mind is. Another indicator, I think, of what the president is thinking is just simply the fact that since these Iranian strikes last night in Iraq, we have not seen a U.S. military response. Remember, the president, in his warnings to the Iranians before the strike, suggested he had 52 sites targeted and ready to go if the Iranians took any action. Well, the president has not pulled the trigger on that option since the Iranians took their action last night. That may indicate that he is in a sort of strategic pause kind of a mindset. We'll see. It's hard to read in anything to what the president might be doing here because aides have been very careful not to give us any indication of what's in these remarks that are coming up. I've been texting and pulling officials aside in the hallway in the West Wing trying to get any indication, and they simply won't tell us what the president's tone is going to be or any of the content of these remarks. So this will be as fresh to all of us as it is to everyone around the world when the president delivers it. But I think those two tonal things give you a sense of where the president might be this morning in terms of opening the wider press in to hear these remarks and having not taken that military action today.
Eamon, we'll obviously be listening for a framework of the strategy regarding Iran. That's important to the market. But also important is sort of what the Washington Post calls a series of confusing and contradictory events, whether or not that was our willingness to go after cultural sites, whether that was whether a decision had been made to start pulling American troops from Iraq. Do we expect him to address that?
I would expect him not to. Now, no one has told me that directly, but the president in the White House yesterday was asked by reporters about that situation in which a U.S. Marine Corps general sent a letter to the Iraqi side, which the language of the letter seemed to indicate that the U.S. was getting ready to pull troops out in response to the Iraqi parliamentary vote over the weekend requesting that the U.S. pull troops out. And then the president said he didn't know anything about that letter and asked Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, to address it. So clearly the president doesn't want to deal with that issue. He seemed to, just by body language and tone, view that very much as a distraction. The White House has said that letter was an accident. It was sent by mistake to the Iraqis, was just a draft, and did not indicate U.S. plans to pull out of Iraq. I think we might get an indication of what his plans are for Iraq. He has said yesterday that he would like to see the United States withdraw from Iraq entirely at some point in the future. Will he give us any clarity on sort of what his vision is for the U.S. troop presence in Iraq over time? That's one open question going into these remarks, Carl.
Eamon, I think what's so incredible to me is that as we've seen these tensions flare, we've seen, these strikes back and forth take place over the last couple of days. So much of the actual communicating and rhetoric has once again taken place over Twitter, whether it's President Trump and his tweet last night, which was kind of surprisingly optimistic, or even Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, which is the tweet that's really been getting circulated around the market today about Iran took and concluded proportionate measures in self-defense, et cetera, et cetera. How do we think about the fact that so much of this is now taking place on Twitter, and how does that compare to previous conflicts, previous issues that have flared up in the past?
I think you've got to look at social media here, Morgan, in two ways. One is there's direct messaging to each government from each government going on here. So the Iranians responding with a tweet of the Iranian flag, sort of trolling the president for his tweet of the U.S. flag last week after the attack on Qasem Soleimani. That seems to be direct sort of messaging government to government. But then you've also got a propaganda effort that's going on here, an enormous quantity of social media activity taking place around all of this. I was sitting in the living room with my 15-year-old son, Declan, last night, who was looking on Instagram, and he said, look at this, Dad, all of these posts in Arabic showing up and in English showing up pro-Iranian under the most recent Donald Trump posting on Instagram. Suddenly 218,000 comments on the president's most recent Instagram post showed up. A lot of those, a flood of those, were from supporters of the Iranian government saying, this is our vengeance, this is our strike back, all happening shortly after the missiles flew last night. So you're seeing this 21st century combination of ballistic missiles and ballistic tweets and ballistic Instagram posts all mixed together, and you've got to really decipher what's being communicated here and who it's being communicated to.
Yeah, it's really, that's a good point, Eamon. So just as we look at this podium and as we await President Trump and his words this morning, is the expectation that he's going to be joined on that stage by other members of his cabinet? I know you mentioned earlier, you were reporting that he spent part of his morning in the Situation Room with the Vice President, Secretary of State Pompeo, Defense Secretary Esper, and the Joint Chiefs Chair Milley, General Milley, as well. Are they going to be on stage with him? Is there any reason to think that we're going to get comments from them?
We don't know the answer to that. Yesterday, he turned to other officials for additional commentary. This venue, though, in the Grand Foyer, traditionally we've seen presidents alone there. I mean, you think one of the more famous episodes recently there was Barack Obama announcing the killing of Osama bin Laden in a very similar venue. Now, we might see the president flanked by his military aides and top civilian advisors, or he may want to do this solo. We don't know. One official here did indicate to me that the president may bring all of those folks up within the camera shot, but we just don't know that for sure. And I think that will also tell you a little bit about what the president's trying to communicate here in terms of the messaging. Is he trying to say it's I and I alone, or is he saying that my entire administration is united on this, and here they are all for you to see? That'll be telling as well.
Bob McNally still with us. Bob, you talked earlier about the risk premium remaining somewhat intact and the chances for further escalation going forward. How much is contingent on what the president says in the next few minutes?
Well, not too much going forward. The president's probably going to ratify the market's relaxation. Since late last night, when it was clear no Americans were killed, and the president canceled the news conference for last night, or the statement. So it's been pretty clear for many hours now. No Americans were killed. The president's red line was not crossed. He is not going to unleash attacks against 52 sites, and we're not going to triple-digit oil for tonight. So the market's reacting with relief to that and some very bearish EIA oil market numbers this morning. So it's understandable. I think the president will probably ratify that while reminding that he's ready to unleash a massive military response if Iran crosses his red lines.
Yeah, Bob, you just mentioned those bearish numbers, inventory numbers today. How much is that weighing on crude right now? And I guess, is it something that's going to actually take over as the bigger narrative today, at least among traders and in the energy pits?
Well, if you set aside geopolitical risk, the bearish narrative is going to take over. First half of this year is really oversupplied. Now, the numbers this morning probably had some tax accounting shenanigans, and there'll probably be some adjustments from EIA. So I think folks are taking that with a grain of salt. Last week's numbers were really goofy, so we'll kind of wait and see on that. But bottom line, there's a tug of war between very bearish first half fundamentals, which are starting to show up in our data, and on the other hand, this geopolitical risk, which has come back after briefly being in mid-September with the Abqaiq and Khurais attacks.
All right, well, Bob, Eamon, stay with us. Roger Altman, founder and senior chairman of Evercore and former deputy secretary of the U.S. Treasury, is also with us right now. Roger, want to get your thoughts, what you expect we may hear from the president this morning and what it means for the broader market.
Well, I think there is relief, as was just said, because Iran essentially sent a dovish message. You know, they intentionally avoided, in my view, killing any American personnel because they don't want this to escalate. And I think that's the clear implication of what happened last night. And it's a good implication, a cause for relief. And presumably, we'll see in a minute, the president will say that we're all on alert and he'll keep his options open and maybe even sound a threatening note. But one hopes that the dovish Iranian response will be accepted by the United States and that the level of tension will be reduced. That's what the market is thinking right now, and that's what we should all hope for.
Roger, given the fact that there does seem to be a de-escalation afoot right now, based on the rhetoric, based on the way these strikes played out last night, would it be crazy to think that we could actually, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, be moving closer to negotiations with Iran?
That's hard to say because, among other things, none of us knows whether President Trump actually wants to negotiate or rather wants to keep Iran in his sights as an enemy, so to speak. In other words, wants the issue rather than the solution. We just don't know that. We also don't know how difficult it would be internally within Iran for the Iranian leadership to negotiate. Very hard to say. I'd be a little bit skeptical on that, but that's more intuition than it is evidence.
There's also the remaining issue of North Korea, which at the turn of the year, Roger, as we all know, had started to saber rattle once again. Another instance in which diplomacy seemed to have diminishing effectiveness. I wonder if you think the White House, even if it's a tangential dynamic, is trying to send a message through what they're doing with Iran to Chairman Kim.
That may be, Carl. I think North Korea is a whole separate thing because looking back on it, the dynamic between President Trump and Kim Jong-un was a pretty strange one, to put it one way. And nothing came out of it at all, despite a lot of theater. I don't happen to think that North Korea is going to do something insane because they would destroy themselves if they tried to initiate any type of hostile act. I think it's all saber-rattling. But nevertheless, that's a whole separate thing. And I think a much more controllable thing than the dynamic with Iran and Iraq in the very combustible Middle East. But the Iran situation, to me, is much more dangerous.
Okay. We want to bring another voice into the conversation as well as we await remarks from President Trump. Anthony Grisanti, president of GRZ Energy, who's here at Post 9. Anthony, great to have you.
Oh, thank you.
Want to get your thoughts on this conversation we're having, what it means not only for crude, but for the broader markets. and just for geopolitical threats?
Well, I think obviously the price of crude will be elevated, but the traders seem to be kind of immune to the situation that's going on here. I think they look at it and say no oil facilities or production has been threatened at this point. None of it's offline. There's been a lot of talk about the Straits of Hormuz, but we've been through 2 Gulf wars and endless conflicts in the Middle East, and those straits have never been closed. China gets a lot of their oil from Iran. They're going to want those straits open right now. The market is pretty well supplied at this point, but more than that, there's a lot of spare capacity that can come online and kind of alleviate if there is a shortage of oil.
I wonder what you think this does to the spread between WTI and Brent right now, especially amid reports that shipping costs, insurance costs for those crude shipments that are moving through that region right now are beginning to go higher.
I was watching it last night, Morgan. That spread a couple of weeks ago was about $5. It's $7, $8 now. I expect it to go out even further from that because the Brent would be most affected by what's happening in the Middle East, in the Gulf right now.
Yeah, Bob, I want to get your thoughts on that too. I wonder if, given the fact that there is this geopolitical risk premium, if you will, potentially in the crude market, what that could mean for incentivizing more U.S. product to be exported around the world right now.
Well, the challenge is we export light crude, and what's being threatened and disrupted are heavier grades. So were there to be a disruption in Iran, were the U.S. to sanction up to 4 million barrels a day of Iraqi crude, which has come on the table. We think it's unlikely, but that's come on the table. This all affects the type of crudes that are really already in short supply, the heavier grades. Now, on the margin, helps the U.S., of course, as a safe and reliable and ample supplier. We'll keep exporting, but our crudes are light and sweet and not what the market's really looking for right now.
Got it. Anthony, the fact that energy stocks are down 1% right now, perhaps not surprising given the numbers we got inventory-wise here in the U.S. and the fact that crude has come off as well.
Yeah, it shows demand, especially gasoline. You know, the biggest derivative of a barrel of crude oil is gasoline. Half of it's refined into that. And when you have a build of 9 million barrels, which is the largest one we've had in about 15 years, you know, that's going to affect the market right now. And unless that demand picks up, you're going to see prices trend lower, not higher.
Yeah, I want to bring another name into this discussion as well. Scott Nation, CIO of Nation Shares, and also a CNBC contributor who's with us too. Scott, want to get your thoughts on what we're seeing in the market. Are you surprised to see the NASDAQ hitting an intraday high even as we have this conversation?
I certainly am. I'm also surprised that the S&P futures are a full 60 handles, 60 points off their overnight low. What's that say? To reiterate what has been said before, the market now believes that the kinetic portion of the turmoil is, to use the word of the day, concluded. I do think it's interesting that the broad market is a little bit higher on the day. Technology stocks are doing well. And because of inventories, energy names are just getting killed. The XOP, the Exploration and Production ETF, is down about 2.5%. The interesting thing is that all of these geopolitical spikes in energy prices have been spikes to sell. And why is that? It's because we have all sorts of production, whether it's Russia, Saudi proving they can get back online very quickly, or frackers here in the United States. So as long as President Trump claims victory, accepts victory, I think the market, the broad market, the equity market is going to be very pleased with this. This could have been ugly. They were really worried. This is going to be a victory for the equity markets as well.
All right, Roger, I want to go back to you and specifically the discussion around Iran. There's been a lot of talk in recent days about whether the whole maximum pressure economic sanctions on the country have actually worked or not, given the fact that we did see this ratcheting up of military strikes between the two countries. Have sanctions worked?
It's a complicated question, but I think the answer is yes. And by complicated, I mean there's a lot of different levels to it. It's worked in the sense that the Iranian economy is extraordinarily weak. There's a lot of discontent prior to the Soleimani assassination on the streets of Tehran and elsewhere in the country. And the sanctions have crippled Iran, although the country was weak to begin with. So if that's your definition of working, they have worked. I think this particular set of tensions, which obviously began in the last 2 or 3 weeks and reached a peak in the last 72 hours, 96 hours, are not particularly related to the sanctions, but have the sanctions weakened Iran? Yes, they've weakened Iran severely.
As we're talking here, markets had a bit of a bounce. Dow's up almost 90 points here, S&P almost 10. Reuters out. Eamon, I mentioned this story a few moments ago, now saying that officials, U.S. officials, say Iran sent guided missiles capable of pretty good accuracy, yet the rockets hit unoccupied areas around buildings. Maybe this was clearly an invitation for the U.S. to take an off-ramp. We'll see.
Yeah, Carl, that's right. And it goes to that question that we were talking about earlier of Iranian intent. And as we watch the White House here and wait for the president's remarks, the question will be about the president's intent as well. And you guys were just talking about this idea of the president sort of declaring victory here, taking a bit of a victory lap in the Grand Foyer. There's danger there rhetorically for the president, though, in doing that, because what the president has to thread here is sending a message to his domestic political audience of that we succeeded here and this is over, if that's what he wants to say, but then also not further antagonizing the Iranians by appearing to take a victory lap in a very public way, in any way that would make them feel that they've lost face, that they didn't accomplish what they set out to accomplish last night. He needs to, in some ways, psychologically leave the Iranians with a sense that they did what they came to do, and at the same time leave the American public with a sense that this has been a successful episode for the United States, if it is in fact over. We'll hear what he has to say, but there's a nuance there that makes this moment so fraught in the White House as we wait to hear from the president, Carl.
Eamon, to your point, President is about 20 minutes late. We're going to take a quick break. Hope to hear from him on the other side. We'll keep Scott Nations, Anthony Grisanti, Roger Altman, and, of course, our own Eamon Javers. And we're back in a minute.
When you look at the world, you don't just live in one room, so why should you Wi-Fi? With Sky Broadband's Wi-Fi guarantee, you'll get Wi-Fi in every room or money back. Perfect for food shopping in the bedroom, gaming in your PJs in the lounge, or streaming sci-fi movies in the kitchen. Get Sky's super-fast broadband and Wi-Fi guarantee. £32 a month for 18 months with $19.95 setup. Click on the banner now.
Sky Fibre errors, Sky Kit required. Refund on boost component of subscription paid during current minimum term up to date of claim. Minimum 3 megabits per second or money back. Prices may change during minimum term. See sky.com/guarantee.
Be better informed, be better prepared. The Better Network is on TuneIn. This is Brent Musburger. Search BETR and start hanging out with me and my guys in the desert weekday afternoons. The Better Network is now on TuneIn.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
The NBA is on TuneIn Premium.
Pointer by Anthony Davis. That's good!
Each week, TuneIn picks an NBA game you just can't miss. Two of the top teams in the Western Conference go head-to-head. This Sunday, the Clippers are at the Nuggets. Tip-off is at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Three ball on the way. He got it to go! Three from the angle. Got it!
Search NBA to follow your favorite NBA team today.
On the goal line, Martin scores! He takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
The move, and a shot, they score!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Live shot of the grand foyer at the White House, where the president was scheduled to start speaking about 21 minutes ago. We are awaiting his appearance. We think he might be joined by some top national security officials, obviously responding to the Iranian attacks on 2 Iraqi bases last night where U.S. troops are housed. Markets had a little of a choppy morning, but for the time being, hold on to the green. S&P up almost 9 points to 32.45 amid a bunch of other cross currents. Carlos Ghosn, ADP jobs 202,000 ahead of the jobs number on Friday. Boeing, of course, and that crash in Tehran.
Yeah, no dearth of news today. Defense stocks are also continuing to hang on to their gains on the heels of this strike from Iran as well. We want to get out to Chicago now and bring in Phil LeBeau for the latest on Boeing, which is one of the biggest drags on the Dow today. Phil.
And Morgan, take a look at shares of Boeing. They're under pressure, but certainly not down as much as was indicated pre-market when the first reports were coming out of Iran about the crash of a 737-800. That's a 737NG, next generation model. It was delivered from Boeing to Ukrainian International Airlines in 2016. So a relatively young aircraft, and it crashed within 2 minutes of taking off. The circumstances of how it crashed are highly unusual, that it was down within 2 minutes of takeoff. Now, there were reports at the time from Iranian news agencies saying that they suspected may have had engine problems. There might have been some mechanical failure. But keep in mind, we hear those kind of reports whenever there is an airplane crash. You have to wait and take a look at the black box, the cockpit data recorder, etc., before you get a better sense of what might have actually brought this plane down. And speaking of the black box, there are reports that Iran does not want to share the black box data with Boeing or the U.S. Interesting whether or not that continues. They certainly can send it to other places overseas where the data can be analyzed. But that'll be an interesting one to see how it plays out over the next few days as they try to get a little bit more details about what exactly happened.
All right, Phil, of course, that all comes in advance of what we're expecting next week, and that is obviously Q4 earnings, a lot of corporate commentary, some high-profile corporate conferences regarding healthcare and other sectors. Bob Pisani is going to be watching all of that as earnings season kicks off next week, Bob.
Yes, and what a roller coaster it was today and overnight. I just want to point out the 3 key developments. People ask, why are we up today, given how difficult things are to interpret? But bottom line is the Iranian foreign minister said Iran took and concluded proportionate measures. Number one, there were no casualties. And of course, we did not target any energy facilities, or they didn't. And that was the key to what was going on here. S&P 500, a wild 50-point move overnight. Down 50 points, 1 hour, and next hour and a half, all the way back to start. The algos went crazy on the initial headlines. Bottom line, though, is we held up all right. $62 to $65 in oil, and then all the way back down. We also got those inventory levels earlier on, and of course, those were bearish. So oil is now essentially collapsing and back to where it was on the time that we had that announcement of the killing of that Iranian official. That was January 2nd. Sectors today, all either side of positive or negative. Semis, retail, some of the consumer staples doing very, very well. I think the key here is what's going on in the earnings situation. We had, even though Walgreens was a little bit of a disappointment, they did reiterate their full year guidance. Constellation Brands, they beat and they raised. That was a good sign overall. Lennar, big home builder, all key metrics also doing better today. Carl, back to you.
All right, Bob, thank you for that. We think we are going to be getting the president in just a moment here. Eamon Javers, I'll give you one last chance to set up what we think the market should be tuned to.
Yeah, Carl, I think we should be watching for 2 things. One is new details on what happened last night in terms of exact casualties, if any, exact bomb damage assessment, number of missiles, all the rest of the sort of military specifics of what actually happened last night. And then more specifics possibly on the president's strategy going forward. How does he see this unfolding, and what is his message to the American people about what they should expect? Is this, as some commentators have said, the brink of war, or is this diplomacy being played out in an entirely alternate fashion? I think that's the signaling that we should look for here from the president. And then finally, any message from him directly to the Iranian leadership.
And also, Eamon, we can't ignore the fact that 2 big players, namely China and Russia, continue to hold a lot of influence in the region, and that's going to be visible when we think get a phase 1 signing next week. There's the defense secretary, the vice president, Secretary Pompeo, and some national security officials beginning to fill in here. As we understand, last night in the Situation Room, the president was joined by Pence, Pompeo, Esper, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So this was, and obviously, communication ongoing last night between the White House and key congressional officials like Speaker Pelosi.
Yeah, and it looks like you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, General Mark Milley, standing there as well as the top-ranking generals for the different services. So I think the expectation here is that we will hear from the president really any moment, and certainly, as we know from Eamon's reporting, that he has spent the better part of the morning with these key national security advisors.
It is striking to consider the fact that this remains a big test for the president, and one that the market really was not discounting in advance. Eamon, as we all know, coming into the new year, it was largely about China trade, and this sort of came out of left field, which is forcing the market to both reevaluate, but also, given the price action over the last 72 hours, really take a lot of this in stride. Here is the president approaching the lectern in the Grand Foyer. Let's take a listen.
As long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well. I salute the incredible skill and courage of America's men and women in uniform. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Last week, we took decisive action to stop a ruthless terrorist from threatening American lives. At my direction, the United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. In recent months alone, Iran has seized ships in international waters, fired an unprovoked strike on Saudi Arabia, and shot down 2 U.S. drones. Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Instead of saying thank you to the United States, they chanted death to America. In fact, they chanted death to America the day the agreement was signed. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration. The regime also greatly tightened the reins on their own country, even recently killing 1,500 people at the many protests that are taking place all throughout Iran. The very defective JCPOA expires shortly anyway and gives Iran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible. And options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. 3 months ago, after destroying 100% of ISIS and its territorial caliphate, we killed the savage leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who was responsible for so much death, including the mass beheadings of Christians, Muslims, and all who stood in his way. He was a monster. Al-Baghdadi was trying again to rebuild the ISIS caliphate and failed. Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. the destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
That is the president, not taking questions, opening his statement by saying that Iran will never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon under his administration. Did say no casualties, a good thing for all parties involved, that for too long nations have tolerated Iran's behavior, that those days are over. And then perhaps the curveball, Eamon Javers, that not everybody was expecting, asking NATO to become more involved in the Middle East process. Didn't get more specific than that, but we know that his relations with NATO have not been always smooth.
Yeah, that's right, Carl. And a message there to U.S. allies, including Germany and the United Kingdom. The president wants them to abandon what he calls the remnants of the Iran nuclear deal, which was signed under President Obama, and which this president has said was a terrible mistake. The president seems to be taking this moment to push U.S. allies to join with him in his approach, much more hardline approach to the Iranian regime, even as he is signaling peaceful intentions here. The president there highlighting the strength of the U.S. military, saying American missiles are big, powerful, lethal, and fast, but we don't have to use them, highlighting even that the United States is working on hypersonic weaponry, but suggesting that the United States is pursuing peace here. So two things happening simultaneously. One is a message to the Iranian regime that the United States wants a peaceful outcome here. And the other one is a message to NATO and U.S. allies that the president wants them on board with his approach. So messaging sort of to a lot of different audiences here, as we saw the president there flanked by the military brass and his top civilian leadership, very much visually there, an effort to show strength of the president's approach as we saw all of those officials gathered around the president to make these remarks, Carl.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, Eamon, and on the heels of the president's comments there, we're hitting session highs for the markets. The Dow's up 139 points right now. The S&P is also up about 0.5% after these comments. You also mentioned $2.5 trillion, the tune to which the military has been rebuilt under his administration. That number is certainly been controversial. It's been getting debated a lot in recent days, as he cited it several times. But the hypersonic missiles piece of this certainly has been a big focus for the Department of Defense. And actually, defense stocks right now continue to rally higher, even as we've seen some of these other geopolitically linked asset classes like gold and crude come off as the morning has unfolded here. What did you make, though, of the fact that he was making a very specific, very blunt message to the leaders of Iran, including, by the way, saying that basically the downfall, the destruction of ISIS would help that country as well as ours?
Yeah, the president clearly here is sending a message to both Iranian leadership and also to the Iranian people, saying that the United States respects the Iranian people and wants to pursue a path of peace, but also at the same time sort of holding out both that carrot and the stick approach, the carrot being a peaceful outcome, the stick being, hey, look what we just did to the leadership of ISIS. As a reminder, we can continue to do that going forward. So the president trying to use sort of all elements of statecraft here in order to pursue his desired outcome here, which is an Iranian government that is not fomenting terror in the Middle East and is not pursuing a nuclear weapon.
Eamon, thank you for that. We're joined this morning as well by UBS Director of Floor Operations, Art Cashin, who's here at Post 9 as we're at session highs, Dow now up 160. And if you take into account the action in futures last night, 600-point swing in the Dow.
Yeah, it's certainly big, but I think it is initially, I think what you had was a lot of algorithmic trading overnight. They saw the headlines, Iran attack, whatever, and the response was clearly disproportional. as more details came out, when it looked like there were going to be limited and maybe even no casualties, and thankfully it was no casualties, that gave people a sense that, wait, this confrontation may be rather limited, and the markets liked that a great deal. Oil came back down. Gold, which had soared, came back down. And now, as the president has, to some degree, diffused some of the anxiety, so you're getting, as Morgan alluded to, you're getting a little bit of a sigh of relief rally here. The fact that this confrontation does not look like it's going to heat up again, we'll cross our fingers and hope that. And that's pretty much where we are. Now we'll look at going back to some of the actual data. The 1030 release on crude inventory showed the massive build in products, particularly gasoline. It may be, it's hard, I don't have the data in front of me, but by my recollection, this may be one of the largest accumulations of gasoline at this time of year that I can recall. So that might put further pressure on oil. And so if the geopolitical tensions ease back, the market could have a little bit of a move.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, Art. Also because, we have had some data in recent days that's been overshadowed by all of these tensions flaring with Iran, whether it's the ISM manufacturing number for December, that was the lowest read in 10 years. Numbers yesterday that came in below estimates as well. Is this something that the market needs to take a closer look at, especially as we go into another jobs report?
Well, if the geopolitical situation is going to calm down, we're going to get in there. You're going to be hearing more about what are the earnings outlooks as we move along in the year. We're at record highs. Can we get earnings to justify that? Right now, they look like they will not be much change from last year. So we're going to need some help on that front.
Yeah, we're showing charts right now, 24-hour charts of the Dow and now a 24-hour chart of the S&P 500, which really sort of tells the story in terms of the volatility we've seen as these strikes have played out and the aftermath, the commentary, the rhetoric, including those comments just a few moments ago from President Trump. The VIX, the volatility index, as we've been speaking, has slipped below 13 as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, even in the middle of all the tensions, the VIX never truly spiked. And, we're getting to some kind of perhaps new normal here where the VIX is not only below 15, but as you point out, below 13, maybe headed below 12. And that may hint that maybe investors are a little too relaxed and unconcerned. But for now, I think it is a good thermometer for what we're seeing.
Well, speaking of being relaxed, this is an S&P all-time high now, a record high, Art.
Wow. After
the events of last night, how much of this is complacency? Or how much of it is a reflection of the durability of the economy, about employment?
Well, I think it is. I think, not to put politics too far into it, but if the president made the move that he made, which was dramatic, and he has managed to get past it without any big negatives, that might enhance his chances for re-election, which for now the market likes. They think he's good for business as opposed to some of the other proposals, the socialist-type proposals that they've seen. So that's in there. Is there some sign of complacency? Yes. But, you can sit here and reason through the market's action so far, and it makes sense. And the abnormality of the sell-off, as I said, it looked like it was mostly algorithmic. So the two-legged humans are more relaxed than the machines are.
What do you make of some of the early prints we've been getting in terms of earnings season? Walgreens right now, it's down 6%.
Yeah, Walgreens was a bit of a shock. I think people are looking for very small changes in earnings, hopefully a little bit better. As I say, here we are at record highs. We can't have deteriorating earnings come by and support that. So while geopolitics remains in the forefront, we're going to have the economy kick in and do better. And the Fed, God love them, don't call it QE, but they're shoveling money in a very high fashion, even bigger than when they were doing QE.
So then what is left on the plate to digest? We're going to start getting earnings next week. We're going to get the Chinese, we think, signing this text. We don't know how specific it'll be. What does the market want more? Great commentary out of corporates or some specificity on China?
I think they will look to China and hope to get specificity. Let's not forget that as we approach the end of the month, Brexit will be coming back in. So we'll have that, and then we'll be moving quickly into the Iowa caucuses. And, that the election has not been a factor for the market yet because it has no idea who the Democratic nominee may be. The more data that we get as we move along, we get past early March when we have Super Tuesday. Those things will become important then. As Jeff Gundlach said last night, if Bernie Sanders begins to look like a very viable candidate, and so far he does, the market may need to come to terms with that. So the election will be a factor, but we've got to move past some of the early looks.
All right. Art Cashin, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, we have the major averages at session highs and fresh highs in general for the NASDAQ and the S&P, but oil is at a session low. WTI is down 4% right now. John Kilda, founding partner at Again Capital and a CNBC contributor, joins us now, along with Tamar Esner, the Corporate Solutions Energy and Utilities Director at the NASDAQ. Good morning to you both. John, I'll start with you. The move lower in crude right now, especially given the fact that we just did have those comments from President Trump. We had those inventory numbers here stateside earlier in the morning as well. Is there any reason to think that it's going anywhere but lower?
No, not right now, Morgan. The Iran fever has broken in a significant way. We were all wondering if there would be some off-ramp achieved or taken by the various sides. The Iranians took it first with their limited strike. President Trump just took it now. And so as a result of that, we have, a lot less fear in this market. And I'll tell you, too, there wasn't a lot of stomach for this whole situation from either the Saudis or the Israelis either. So with this going forward now, the geopolitical tensions have almost, I don't want to say evaporated, but they have been decimated.
And Tamara, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know if we're necessarily completely out of the woods yet in terms of geopolitics that can come back to roost at any point, but the market does have a very high hurdle to have sustained gains in prices. So what the market really needs to see is a disruption to oil supplies that remains in place for a prolonged period for prices to sustain their gains. So I agree with your guess that unless there is a severe escalation, if there is just a contained escalation, an ongoing tit for tat that doesn't really impact supplies, you're not likely to see the continued upward momentum in oil prices.
Yeah, President Trump just talked about sanctions again in his remarks this morning. In terms of the impact of sanctions and what that has meant to oil supplies, to the bigger, broader OPEC picture and global prices in general, Tamar, is that already fully baked in, even if we were to see more sanctions?
Well, I don't know how much more oil we could squeeze from Iran, from the market. The more near-term worry for me in terms of geopolitics would be what happens to oil supplies in Iraq. Iraq is producing about 4.5 million barrels a day, very significant production. So if that were to come down, that would be problematic. But Iraq is very much incentivized to continue pumping. Of course, unfortunately, it is caught in between broader forces at play. But in terms of Iran, I don't see much more upward momentum that could cause in the market, since, to your point, that is mostly baked in.
Hey, John, we didn't expect the president to get more specific about the imminent threat that the general had in mind. But is the argument now that because he's dead, that threat is gone, that Iran will not follow through on ideas they had previously?
Yeah, very much so, Carl. It's interesting, the command and control there. He was very much his own operator, and he was very much entrusted and trusted by the Ayatollah. The new replacement not going to have the length of the leash that Soleimani had. So, yes, I think you have a chance for less activity in terms of warfare type of activity. We still remain subject to the asymmetric risks. And as far as Iran playing the oil card, the oil disruption card, they have to be careful with that, because to the extent they get oil prices sky high and it impacts their few friends, China, and others in Asia, their main customers that are still buying in a sort of a subterfuge manner. They risk that. So that's why that's not necessarily a high probability outcome, but it's still the main risk for the oil market. But with what's happened here today, that has gone way down.
John, that's such a key point. I wonder if you think energy infrastructure in the region, whether after those drone attacks in Saudi on the Aramco facilities a couple of months ago, after what we've seen and all the worry, the concern about what a counterstrike from Iran before we got one last night could look like, and whether energy would be embroiled, whether you think infrastructure in places like Saudi, in places like Iraq, et cetera, are well enough protected, and if not, if there's going to be more demand for those types of protections.
There's absolutely going to be more demand for those types of protections. The Saudis are buying up whatever they can get their hands on. Russia, too, is rushing their S-400 system and shopping around to everyone who will take a look at it and potentially buy it. So, yes, this is a very much a big opportunity for the defense companies that manufacture this stuff. This is the next phase. You heard President Trump reference the early warning system that alerted our troops to the incoming fire. That's what's being developed more and more on a daily basis, and it's going to be deployed more and more over the coming months and years.
Tomorrow, I'm wondering what you think of John's rather dovish reaction to the death of the General Soleimani, and you couple that with what some of the hawks worry about, and that still remains this game-changing technology that drones bring, their ability to fly low, take out targets in ways they never have been in the past.
Well, that's the point, is that there are any number of options on the table. So we've already seen that critical energy infrastructure is vulnerable. Whether or not Iran chooses to attack that again or go for more of an element of surprise and attack via cyber or other ways remains to be seen. I think the bet of the market is that they are not going to tackle energy infrastructure because it will hurt their friends and that will be more problematic for them. I think the market, therefore, as a result, is going to remain on knife's edge. So we might not move higher from here, but I think some of the recent strength could be sustained as a result of the fact that it really could go in any direction. And I don't think that it's safe to say that we're completely out of the woods just yet. But we've had a steady escalation in the situation with Iran, but it's been in a relatively organized manner. And so as long as we have that, I don't think that there's much upward momentum from where we are now.
John, shifting gears just a little bit here, I want to get your thoughts on the inventory numbers we got here in the U.S. earlier this morning. Not only an unexpected build in terms of crude, but the gasoline numbers. How worrisome are those for, I guess, petroleum products and pricing as we come into the season?
Well, they're certainly not worrisome for America's drivers, Morgan, I'll tell you that.
Fair point. Consumers will love it.
They're joyful numbers. But seriously, look, this is a slack demand period now. After the holiday shopping season, those demand numbers for gasoline rival the summer driving season for a shorter period of time. And so here we go. We're going to see these inventories rise. We're having a terrifically warm winter here in the Northeast so far, with more to come, 60 degrees over the weekend. So heating oil demand is low. And this is a time of year, too, when over-the-road truck traffic is low. So it makes sense that these inventories build now, but they have built substantially over the past several weeks. And crude oil inventories are now rebounding after this phenomenon that happens as they try to reduce inventories to avoid a tax in Texas at the end of every year.
All right, John and Tamar, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
With all of that, stocks now at session highs, oil at a session low. You got a record high on the S&P and the NASDAQ, which just cracked 9K, it seems like the other day, currently 91.35. We're back in a moment.
For drug-free sinus and allergy relief.
Boredom, fitness enemy number one. So don't just run. Mix it up, skip, run. Give yourself a lift, mix it up, lift, mix it up, run, lift, splash, skip, lift, run. It's crunch time. Skip, mix it up, run, mix it up. Add a boxing class. Skip, run, splash, skip, run. Mix it up at Virgin Active and get stronger, fitter, faster. Join now for 12 months and pay nothing in January. T's and C's apply. Run, mix it up, skip, mix it, run. Mix it.
Hairy Bikers here. This message goes out to something very special.
Yes, we're talking to you, chicken.
Maybe we've been seeing too much of each other.
But times have changed, Dave.
We've been cheating on meat.
Thing is, North stocks make veggie dishes so irresistible that cheating on meat is proper tasty.
Oh, dear chicken, you were the fire in my life. But it's all about you now, aubergine katsu curry. Prepare to be wined and dined, my love.
Cheat on meat with no veggie stocks.
This ain't just lunch. It's the KFC fill-up lunch for $1.99. It's mighty fine. Tingles your spine, so jump in line, because it's time to dine on a mini fillet burger, 2 hot wings and fries, all for a fist-pumping $1.99. What the... The KFC fill-up lunch every day until 3 p.m. At participating restaurants every day from 2nd to 26th of January until 3 p.m. only, subject to availability.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
You might already know that TuneIn allows you to listen to all the pro sports leagues wherever you go. But did you know TuneIn is also home to the wide world of college sports?
Open three, DeAndre Hunter got it! Handoff Carruthers, big hole right side. He leaps and he surges in, touchdown!
From live college football, basketball, and baseball games to podcasts and coaches shows fueling your love for the game in your school. And the best part is, it's all free. Search college sports to find your team or league.
Right now, instead of hearing this, you could be listening to the music that keeps you moving with TuneIn Premium. Find today's biggest songs and all of your favorites commercial-free. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
S&P record highs along with the NASDAQ. We're going to close out this hour with Mike Santoli, who's going to talk about how the market is willing to tolerate all kinds of geopolitical events.
Yes, in the right sequence and cadence, the market will tolerate it. I mean, I think we came into this year with the trend being very solid. It's a very broad rally. The cyclical groups are leading the way. Everything was in place, and I think you had a couple of risks. One is you had run out of things to worry about. To be honest with you, we sort of wiped away a lot of the obvious uncertainties. Sentiment was getting a little overconfident. So that was going to be a headwind no matter what. And the question is, was this enough to kind of puncture that sense of excess optimism and kind of get the market to sort of have a little bit of a short-term gut check, whatever it was at the lows and the futures last night, a couple % off the highs, in order to make people feel smart adding risk when they already had enough risk coming into the year? That's the tactical story right now. I don't know if it did the job, to be honest with you. I still think that people are still pretty happy right now. You're seeing this instinct to buy the huge growth leaders that are the most obvious stocks in the world, and they're still buying them up at these levels. So I do wonder if this is just a little bit of relief because you had gotten hedged into this moment. But longer term, it's hard to say that the rally is not substantiated by super strong credit markets, and at least for now, the macro and corporate data go in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, we've found ourselves having this conversation again about TINA. There is no alternative, and FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah. And that does still seem to be the thing that's driving
people
this market.
Find alternatives if they find something legitimate to be afraid of. They will. Yeah. Cash is an alternative. You know, treasuries at 2% are an alternative, but they're just not attractive when the world doesn't seem so dangerous.
Certainly not much on the tape after the bell. Tonight we'll get Bed Bath.
Exactly.
But we'll start talking more about the jobs number on Friday after ADP crushed it once again.
Absolutely. We'll see if it's predictive this time. Yeah.
That does it for us here on Squawk Alley. Let's get to the judge in the half.
Carl, thanks. I'm Scott Wapner, front and center this hour. The amazingly resilient U.S. stock market, which despite a new level of risk, continues to hit new milestones. So what does that say about where your money will work in the months ahead? It is 12 noon. And this is the halftime report.
Investors brushing off rising risks, where opportunities are opening up, and how to trade this market from here. Apple and tech in 2020. The #1 hardware analyst on the street tells us how to play the big cap names. Microsoft soaring more than 50% in the past year, and it just got its price target raised to the highest on the street. We'll debate in our call of the day. Plus 10 growth stocks that look attractive right now. The investment committee is ready to go. Halftime report starts right now.
And it is good to have you with us on this Wednesday. Our investment committee here today, Joe Terranova, Jim Lebenthal, Steve Weiss, Kerry Firestone's the CEO of Arias Asset Management. Also with us on set today is Mike Wilson. He is the chief U.S. equity strategist at Morgan Stanley. We begin where else? The market. Stocks reversing significant overnight losses to be mostly positive now. In fact, the S&P and NASDAQ both hitting new all-time highs. Jim, this is clearly, it seems, the market making a bet that while the tensions with Iran may continue, the conflict will not.
Yeah, let's see if we can simplify a complex situation. Obviously, the geopolitical tensions cause volatility, but what keeps the market on stable footing is liquidity, and the Fed and everything it's done over the last 13 months to increase liquidity and give stability. So where you go in the short term is a balance between those two that we're seeing struck right now. In the long term, we know what we need. We need earnings growth this year over last year. We need that 6 to 8% earnings growth in the S&P 500, and I think you only get that if you get capital expenditure picking up. Our insight into that comes when the earnings season, the fourth quarter earnings season, starts next week.
So, Weiss, is it time to relax, look at the big picture? Oil's lower today, gold is lower today, and as we said, the NASDAQ goes above 9,100 for the first time. S&P hits its own intraday high. Time to look back at some offense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm pretty sure of it. Longer than I've been, and I don't remember when. Look, I think we've got a new paradigm in the market, and the paradigm is what we see with Tesla, what we see with Microsoft, what we see with others, and it doesn't come to valuation, it comes to momentum of fundamentals. So as long as the fundamentals continue to move to improve, as long as companies continue to meet and beat their targets, you'll continue to see the market rise because you've got liquidity, because you've got the Fed and virtually every central bank in your back pocket that. And by the way, the knowledge that Europe's still slow and not really picking up. Asia's picking up. So to me, that replaces valuation. Now, you can't ignore it completely, because that would just be foolish. And you can tell me things never change, they're always the same. But I do think we're seeing a change here and have been seeing it. So I remain positive on the market, and I like when others are sort of negative. Now, I agree with you. If we have negative earnings, that's going to be a little...
Or flat.
Or flat. That'll take it down a little bit. But again, that's an opportunity. And I'll disagree with you on one thing. There was no volatility in Iran. I don't call market being down 1% after the major move we've had.
Futures
volatility.
Futures last night were pretty bold.
Right.
But how about this? Instead of us arguing about that, I think we'll probably agree on this. Opportunities are going to arise. So we can talk about those Momo stocks, those things, and I don't need to, well, I will. The Apples and Microsofts. I know we're getting to
that Mike Santoli just said at the end of the last hour, they continue to be bought.
They do. But here's the thing. After the runs those have had, it's reasonable to trim a little bit and take that dry powder and say when another attack occurs. And I hate saying it, but I'm saying it.
I'm not fully invested, by the way.
When another attack occurs, put that money that you trimmed from those high flyers into a great opportunity. They're all over the place.
Well, I think what we're really saying is the momentum isn't just earning or valuation. There's real momentum in demand. So we looked at overnight fear. And people thought, I thought that the market would open down today. And there's obviously a lot of people who put in buy orders because they thought the market would be down and they would get to buy at some more attractive prices. They're pushing the market up. And it's many of the same names. But let's face it, there are people who have been very bearish on the market, have been trying to plow back and look at the fourth quarter up 9%. They are still buying when they think they have an opportunity, even if the market is making them pay higher.
I think we expect that when the calendar changes, everything about each asset class is going to change. It feels as though there's really nothing different about 2020 from 2019. All the asset classes are moving higher once again.
It did, 12 hours ago.
Well, it felt that way. And
24
again,
hours ago, it sure felt like it could be on the precipice of something. And here we are with a 60-point rally from the lows overnight in the S&P.
So I would say it highlights and really underscores the lack of relevancy that oil has to the S&P. It's 4% of the S&P. It's something that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, would have been so dominant in the conversation of where the S&P was going to go on that day.
Crude's down 4% right now, by the way.
Crude is off 5% from the...
And gold's down 1%.
So crude is off 5% from the high last night. Energy equities are down 1.5% on the day, and the S&P is totally fine with that. Predicting the price of oil, which is something that I spent the better part of my career doing, has now become as challenging as figuring out who the Giants' next football coach is going to be, okay? Crude was down 8% on Christmas Eve of 2018. You know what crude did over the next 2 weeks? It went up 20%. In the last 10 years, crude has had a 5% decline from an intraday high over 50 times. That would obviously extrapolate that it's going to go lower? No. was 2% higher over
But
the
that
next 2
supports
weeks.
my view that,
Right, so
it's not an investable asset class.
It's become something so different. And just real quick, because I shared this with you before the show, and I think it's a great observation. I spoke to Mark Fisher, our friend of the show, before the show, and he mentioned something that's really true. Gold has replaced oil in portfolios for traders. It has become what oil once was. And gold, to your point, it's only down 1.5% today. I think that's the right trade if you think there's more fear and volatility coming.
I totally disagree with that. I'm
Me
sorry.
too.
Gold has become even more irrelevant. I mean, I remember 20 years ago, the gold bugs, those managers you talk to, you got to own gold, you got to own gold. Doesn't yield anything. It's getting competition from things like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. It's just losing its relevance.
Was that reality in terms of price from 20 years ago? You know the answer.
All right. Hold on.
Okay.
I'd like to get to Mike Wilson, who's sitting here patiently listening to you guys. Welcome back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
3,200, 3,250 is your bull case for the S&P. So we're going nowhere, according to you, this year. Isn't today a perfect example that you're on the wrong train, and then maybe it's time to get off at the station and get on to the train that's actually going somewhere in the S&P?
Well, we did. So, as you know, 3250 is our year-end target, right? So we've been pretty explicit that we think we can trade 3,500 in the first half because of the liquidity that's plowing into the market. So back in November, I think we were here last time in September, we said, look, if things change, we'll change our view. And we did. We raised our targets, and we said we're going to have a liquidity-driven bull market into the first half of next year. And so we raised our target to 3,250 for bull, and we said we'd get there probably in short order. And we have. And we got there faster than we even thought, quite frankly. 3,500 we talked about last month and a half ago is a target for the first half of this year. What we're concerned about in the back half of the year is that the liquidity will start to be drained because the Fed will no longer be expanding their balance sheet along with other central banks. And we will have politics to maybe be concerned about. And we'll have to look forward to 2021, where there'll be more uncertainty again about the sustainability of a late cycle environment, right? There's no recession, right? The late cycle expansion has been extended. The Fed got in front of it. They are very aggressive. The yield curve re-steepened, and we changed our view on that. But that doesn't mean that the fundamentals are driving this momentum. It's more about the liquidity, and the fundamentals improved. But it's hard to argue that there's going to be enough earnings growth to justify the move that we've had in the last 3 or 4 months. To me, it's about liquidity and the fact that the fundamentals stabilized. And so people are buying high-quality liquid names.
What kind of earnings growth do you need for the market
I think you need 10% to see the 3,500 to be sustained.
That
and
much?
Then further
10%?
Yeah, I think you need 10% this year. I think we're going to get more like low single digits now, 2 or 3%. We were at 0. Our models are coming up a little bit. And so that's what the market's going to have to deal with in the back half of the year. I think it's pretty clear the market is still buying somewhat defensively oriented stocks. Look, Microsoft and Apple are the highest quality stocks in the marketplace. We love Microsoft. We just raised our price target today to the highest in the street. It's expensive, but so what? If there's liquidity, it's the highest quality name in the marketplace, and that's what people are going to continue to buy.
Apple's a defensive name now?
Apple is a high quality name, okay, not defensive. Remember but the market is paying for quality growth, and that's what we want to pay for too. We think high quality, large cap growth is what the market wants, and that's what the market's going to continue to buy.
By the way, Apple, as we speak, hits $301. That's a new all-time high for Apple as well. I look at the picture. I feel like the economy is just fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
The Fed, you say, okay, they're QE or whatever is going to end. They're still going to be there though.
That's right. They're going to be there, but they're not going to be pumping money into the system.
How do you know?
Well, we don't know. That's a fair point. So we will adjust our view again for back half of the year. Who cares what happens in the back half of the year? I'm focused on the next 6 months right now, right? And we're bullish on the next 6 months for a lot of different reasons, not just liquidity. Look, the fundamentals have improved more globally than they have in the U.S. so far. Most of the incremental improvement in PMIs has been in China and in Europe, not so much in the U.S. yet. We think that'll follow. The U.S. will be a laggard in the recovery globally. Okay, we've also had sentiment improve. Obviously, you got too bearish in the summer. We got valuations were cheap. And we've corrected that. That's where we are now. And I could argue the market's fairly priced today, but we think it will overshoot because of liquidity primarily.
What happens if it looks, okay, let's say the first half of the year, I think most people agree is the more sanguine part of the year. You don't have much in front of you, and then you get past into the summer, you have to start thinking about the election. That's when you think it could get a little rocky.
Potentially.
What happens if it looks like the president's going to get reelected?
that'll be positive. But we don't know that right now, right? So who cares?
Well, isn't that you deal with base and bull and whatever case?
That's right.
Is it the base case right now is that the president gets reelected?
The base case
Don't
is
you
the president. Yes, I think that's right. With some consternation in the back half, not knowing what the answer is going to be. And if the president gets reelected, yes, maybe in December we have a big rally on that. But then we got to look forward, Scott, into 2021. Okay, we can agree that the economy is late cycle. Would we agree with that? I mean, the unemployment's at 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years, and it could fall further. But if it falls to say 3.2 or 3.1% by the end of the year, does that raise the risk then of an unemployment cycle, or is it lower the risk? I would argue it probably raises the risk again. So your risk premiums have to go back up, and your multiples come down. That's all we're talking about. Multiples come back down to a more normal level, 17 times from 19 times.
So, Mike, I have a question. If you're assuming that the market, your base case is that the market by the end of the year, by the end of this year, is down 7%. I mean, that's what the numbers said. That implies you have flat earnings, or you must assume that the economy really weakens, that we're either in a recession or heading into recession, because if the market grows in consensus, I think, is for earnings to grow 8-9% this year. At that price, the market would be trading at 15 times earnings. So in order for there not to be a very attractive buying opportunity, earnings have to be coming down. So you've got a much more negative view on the economy than I'd say I do.
So that's what's the economy. The economy is decelerating this year from last year. I think the consensus view is that we're going to decelerate.
Well, we had flat earnings.
Correct.
2019, and you're assuming flat earnings in 2020, which I think isn't it more negative than?
We're assuming about 2 or 3% growth for this year from last year. Last year we predicted 0% earnings, and it was 0% earnings. The model now is saying 2 to 3%. Right. So
congratulations.
What's your progression on that 2 to 3% by quarter? Well, are you seeing the first quarter is going to be up 5%, the second quarter up 7.5%, and then we're down in the next 2 quarters?
It's going to be sort of flattish throughout the year unless there's an acceleration in growth beyond the 1.8%, so we get more top line, or costs get under control. The bigger question that we have, and the way we think about the market, is basically there's not only income inequality, okay, in individuals, there's corporate income inequality, okay. So our call for an earnings recession is more predicated on small mid-cap companies. That's where the quality is lower, right? And that's really where we're focused right now. We're not so focused on price targets for year end, okay? That's not how you make money. We're focused on the next 6 months. We're focused on what's the market going to like right now, what's the market not going to like right now.
So on that point, it's exactly where I wanted to go. I don't understand how you think the market can get to 3,500, but you're underweight the biggest part of the market, which is tech.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
We're not underweight the entire sector, right? So we own high quality tech within that, which could be the largest market cap companies, okay? For example, Microsoft, which is a name we've had on the list for 18 months. So underweight, overweight doesn't mean you don't own anything, okay? You could own the better performers within that, as an example.
But you don't have a wholly positive view on tech.
No, we think tech has a higher propensity of risk because it's crowded. For the average company, once again, we're talking about the average company within the sector. Remember, equal weight versus market cap weight is very, very different. So we look at our sector weights as what's the best fertile ground for picking stocks from an average stock perspective, right? Where's the risk reward going to be good for the average stock within that sector?
You still have a defensive bent as well.
Yeah,
staples and utilities, in terms of your sector recommendations,
because we think rates are going lower, and so those stocks are going to continue to hold up, which they have, by the way, held up over the last 18 months, even though they've underperformed the last 3 or 4 months. We don't think this is a time to be going full on high beta